This story happened a few years ago. I would often go to Starbucks to get work done on my laptop. It was my favorite place to work because I liked their coffee, and I didn't have the distractions I would have at home, so I could get a lot more work done. One day in the winter, I was working like I often did. It was nighttime, probably about 7:30 or so. The Starbucks I like to go to closed at 8:30, so it was pretty calm and not really anybody else was there other than me at the time. I sat in my favorite spot, which was in the back corner at a table with this one soft chair that they had. I had to go to the bathroom, so I got up and walked over to it, which was only about 10 feet away from where I sat. I was in the bathroom for maybe a minute or two, and then came back out and returned to my laptop. I went back to work until I realized something. There was a portable USB stick that was in my computer. I knew it wasn't mine, and it hadn't been there before. I took it out and looked around the coffee shop. There was nobody else in there besides me. I got up and walked around, and then went to the counter and brought the USB with me. I asked someone working there if they had seen anyone go to my computer and handed them the USB drive. I was told they hadn't seen anyone, but they took the USB to hold on to. I looked from the counter and could see that the area I had been sitting in was obscured from the vision of whoever was working. I went back and got my laptop and then left. I was hoping that whatever that was a joke and they didn't mess up my computer in any way. When I got home, I looked on my computer again and noticed that there was a new folder on the bottom left side of my screen. It was titled with just a bunch of numbers, and I clicked on it to see a text document. When I opened it up, a message read, "Hello, I know everything about you, where you live, who you are, and what you're doing." It really creeped me out, and I closed and deleted the file. Could this be true? Did the USB stick on my computer somehow reveal all of my information? I was terrified. As I was on my computer, suddenly something popped up on my screen. It was a video of myself on my webcam in a window. I tried to close the window, but I couldn't. No matter how many times I clicked or what I did, it just stayed there on my screen. It was the creepiest thing ever, so I slammed my laptop shut. I didn't use it again for a long time after that, and ended up taking it to a professional to have it cleared and reset. Looking back at that experience, I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm afraid whoever did that to me knew where I lived. I used to go to Starbucks all the time. I would say at least 2 or 3 times a week I would stop at Starbucks for coffee on my way to work. I would order online every time as I left my house and then pick it up on my way. I got it so often that some of the employees started to recognize me, and I would be friendly with a few of them. Sadly though, the lines at the location I usually went to were always super long, and one day I realized another Starbucks that was also on my way to work. I made the choice to switch locations to see if it would be faster, and it was in fact quite a bit faster every single day, and it saved me some time. After I would say about a couple of weeks of going to the new location, one day I forgot to place my order online. It wasn't a big deal, but I would just have to order at the drive-thru at the Starbucks. When I got there, the voice on the other end of the speaker of the drive-thru said hi to me and called me by my name. This surprised me because I had only been to that location 3 or 4 times at that point, and it wasn't a daily basis or anything. I also didn't recognize the voice as it was a man's voice, and all the people I knew from the previous location were females. I pulled up to the next window after I ordered, and a man with a headset came to the window. I paid and he handed me my coffee and smiled. He once again said my name and told me to have a nice day, then he winked at me. The man was rather tall and had sort of long dark hair with a slight beard. I have to say I had never seen him before, but beyond that I really didn't think anything of it. It wasn't until every single time that I would go to Starbucks after that, he would be working and would always be the one to hand me my order. Each time he would wink at me or have an almost creepy grin on his face. None of this really bothered me though, but it did feel a little bit strange. Then I stopped seeing the man. There were different people every time when I got my coffee in the morning, and I didn't really notice the fact that I wasn't seeing this strange guy anymore. One of the times I went inside to pick up my coffee and was walking back to my car when suddenly I saw the man again. He was in the parking lot and he approached me as I was getting into my car. I didn't really recognize him at first. It took me a few seconds. He said hi to me and smiled and asked me how I was doing. I said fine in a confused tone and asked what he wanted. He then asked me how the movie I watched last night was. Then he winked at me like the past times and walked away. I stood there next to my car in shock. I had in fact been watching a movie the previous night, but I had no idea how he knew about it. I was really creeped out, and for me, this was the last straw with the man from being slightly weird to completely creepy. I had no idea who this guy was other than the fact that he worked at the Starbucks and was creepy. I decided to go back inside the Starbucks and ask another employee who he was. I first looked around the parking lot, but the man was gone. I then walked inside the Starbucks, which was relatively busy, but nothing too crazy. I went to the counter and asked who the man was with longer brown hair, a slight beard, and pretty tall. I was told in response that it sounded a lot like a guy named Jonathan, who had worked there but had been fired for inappropriate behavior around the workplace. They said he had worked at another location close by, but had moved to that location shortly before getting fired. I briefly told my story. I was told by several people that they thought he seemed creepy and had apparently followed one of his coworkers home one night. It gave me the chills as I realized this Jonathan guy most likely was outside of my house the previous night and saw me watching a movie. So many thoughts started to race through my head, such as how did he know where I lived, and had he followed me home or been to my house before? I had to go to work at that point, so I left, but throughout the day I texted with several of my friends about what had happened. Later that day I got home from work and asked my friend Lisa to come over and keep me company. I got home and shortly after heard the sound of Lisa pulling up. I was so relieved because I really didn't want to be alone in my house that night after what had happened. But then I received a text from Lisa saying that she would be there in about 15 minutes. I went over to look out the window and noticed a different car driving slowly down the street outside my window. I lived in a quiet neighborhood and there wasn't a whole lot of cars that went down the street, so I sort of noticed when they did. It was a black car and the windows were tinted. It parked across the street, but slightly past my house. Of course, I was paranoid and worried that it was the Jonathan guy. I watched the car from my window, hoping to see somebody, anybody get out of the car that wasn't Jonathan from Starbucks. But nobody was getting out. Then my phone started to vibrate and ring in my left hand as I held the living room curtain open with my right. It just about gave me a heart attack, and I closed the curtain and looked at who was calling me. It was a number that I didn't recognize. I decided to answer it. The voice on the other end was the familiar voice of Jonathan. I heard him ask me why I was watching him and told me to come outside. I freaked out at this and screamed as loud as I could that I was calling the police. He then hung up on me and I opened the curtain slightly to see his car pulling away. I then called the police and they said they would be on their way. They arrived a short time later along with Lisa. I gave them as much information as I could on Jonathan, and I stayed at Lisa's house the next few nights. Finally, I was told that Jonathan had been found, and I would no longer have to worry about him anymore. He had worked at the first Starbucks I had been to almost every day, and apparently asked to transfer when he realized I had gone to another one. I just wonder how long he knew where I lived, or how many times he had been to my house without me noticing. Last year, I went to Starbucks for some coffee. I don't get Starbucks all that often, but I do from time to time. On this particular day, I was pretty sleepy but had to drive about an hour home, so I went for some coffee. It wasn't all that busy there, but there were a few other cars in the drive-thru ahead of me. I pulled in and waited. Eventually it was my turn, and I ordered. When I got to the window to pay, I was told that my order had been paid for by the person in front of me. I wasn't asked if I wanted to keep it going and pay for the next person, but was just handed my coffee. I was pretty happy about it until I drove away and noticed that within the little cardboard thing that goes around the cup, there was a piece of paper rolled up into a note. Obviously I was driving, so I didn't bother reading the note, but once I got home almost an hour later, I read it. It was a small piece of paper which gave details about me and my family, such as names, addresses, and phone numbers. I was told that I needed to come up with $10,000 or something very bad would happen. I couldn't believe what I was reading or how this happened. I had never been to that Starbucks location before and didn't even remember what car had been in front of me to pay for my drink or anything like that. But I was terrified, so I went straight to the police. When I did, I was told they would investigate, and they told me a short time later that they didn't believe I had anything to really worry about. Still, I did worry about it, and I never did consider giving whoever it was the money. I didn't even know how to contact them. It's been a while since that happened now, and I guess maybe it was a joke or something, but I still don't know how to explain any of that, like how the person got my information, or why they chose me in the drive-thru that day.
I'm quite an outdoorsy person, and so is my family, and we go on family camping trips every summer. I'm an experienced hiker and outdoorsman, and I frequently visit trails and parks, sometimes by myself, just to get my mind off things. I'm a teacher, so I have winter, summer, and spring break off, where I can take multiple day trips and camp somewhere. This occurred during winter break. It had snowed heavily, and the weather was cold, but in a magical Christmas way. I was going through a tough time in my life, so just to have something nice to do, I went out to a wooded area with my trailer to camp. It was a pleasant surprise to see that the park was void of people clearly not wanting to be in the cold weather. Me, on the other hand, had loved the snow and cold. It's just peaceful for me. I booked my campground spot for 3 nights. On the second night, it was amazing. The snow was nice and soft, and the moon was bright. It was perfectly bright enough to see almost the entire forest with a gentle blue glow. I just had to go on a night walk. That's how nice of a scene it was. The trails around the area go pretty far, so I left just after sundown. Most of the walk was uneventful. At the 2/3 mark of the trail, I heard a sound coming from the trees, a barely noticeable huff like something had been startled. I was surprised and immediately thought that it was another hiker. I looked in the direction of the noise, and if I were to tell you that I was so scared I heard ringing in my ears, it would be an understatement. I only saw his silhouette. He was tall, freakishly tall, at least 8 feet tall, long arms going down to his knees, standing upright like a person. He had weirdly proportioned features, almost like what you see in skinwalker stories, except I don't think that's what it was. He stood there like he was shocked that I was there, like he had never seen a person before. He wasn't aggressive, but more curious. I looked at him like I had never seen anything like him. We were almost parallel to each other in our reaction. He tilted his head slightly and leaned forward to get a better look. We were 20 feet away from each other, enough distance for me to at least get a head start if need be. I was still scared out of my mind, but I came to my senses enough to see that he wasn't aggressive, more curious than anything. I reached into my satchel and grabbed a piece of beef jerky and threw it at him. He took a step back and looked at it before slowly crouching down and grabbing it. He then started walking back into the dense forest. I wasted no time sprinting to the trailer, packing everything up, and booking it out of there. I didn't even care about checking out and canceling my last day. Since then, I've never been able to go back to the park without thinking about him, who he was, if he was real or a figment of my tired imagination. It was my friend's 17th birthday. He's really into camping and various other outdoor activities. I was invited along with a few other friends, but because it was a really busy time of the year before graduation, only 4 of us ended up going. It was my friend and myself, and then his 13-year-old brother, who had also brought a friend. We camped at a lake out of town, a little bit into the woods. The spot we camped in was a small clearing. It wasn't an actual official camping spot, but it worked well nevertheless. We ended up cutting our own firewood from nearby trees. We didn't want to, but my friend forgot firewood, and we didn't have any cell phone service where we were. If you've ever cut down trees with smaller camping saws and hatchets, you know it takes a while, even with the 4 of us. Over the course of 4 hours, we acquired quite a collection of firewood, so when the sun started to set, we got hungry and wanted a fire. The fire took an hour to start. Thanks to the rain that morning, the woods was very damp. Eventually, with the help of some hand sanitizer in my backpack and the wood drying out from our other attempted fires, we got a decent fire going. I remember being really relieved. We were really hungry and managed to cook up some hot dogs and bacon. We were quite tired from the day of cutting down small trees, so we retired to our large tent pitched in the clearing. We fell asleep very fast, but around 2 in the morning, I woke up from a really cold and loud wind. I remember struggling around in my sleeping bag trying to find a comfortable position or trying to stay warm. I ended up just lying in bed for what seemed like hours, unable to sleep, until suddenly I heard a loud snapping of a branch, which I just put off as a small animal. I mean, we were in the middle of the forest, so it made sense at the time. Anyways, around 3 minutes later, I heard it again, but just a little closer. I thought about waking my friend or his brother up, but being me, I didn't want to be rude and wake them up just in case it was just an animal. That's when I heard distinct footsteps that sounded maybe 10 or 15 feet away. At this point, a chill ran up my spine, and I instantly thought, what if it's a cougar or a bear? As living where we were in Canada, it wouldn't be uncommon. Nevertheless, I was a little scared. Now, it's worth noting that my friends and I all had decent-sized knives on us, along with various other sharp objects, like our hatchet and compound bow. At this point, I kept hearing these footsteps very slowly, so I armed myself with my knife and put my friend's hatchet through my belt loop. I slowly unzipped the tent, slipped my shoes on, and decided to check it out. That probably wasn't the best choice looking back on it now, but I was trying my best to be brave. Gripping my knife, I creeped outside into the cold night. For a minute, I searched around the tent, finding nothing. So I decided to take a pee as long as I was up, and then after I was done, I started back towards the tent, and then heard another branch snap. Trying not to be loud, I called out, "Who's there?" No response. So I started to walk towards the sound when I saw the dark silhouette of a large, what looked like middle-aged man. I panicked and called out, "Who are you?" while raising my knife. The man rotated his body towards me before he turned around and sprinted off down the trail towards the parking lot. I stood there shocked for a minute. I didn't sleep much that night, waking up constantly. In the morning, I told my friend, his brother, and his brother's friend. They were very shocked by this, but my friend's brother told me around 1 in the morning he also heard footsteps and branches. Who knows what that man's intentions were for 4 teenagers camping in the woods? Maybe he was on drugs or another camper nearby, which I really doubt. What creeps me out the most about this incident is that in that area where he was standing, which I checked in the morning, was where I found my friend's brother's sweater on the ground. He claimed he didn't put it there, and I don't think the wind moved it there. In the summer of 1988, my aunt was a college student in Utah. She and her boyfriend, who later became my uncle, went camping with another couple in a park about 40 minutes south of Salt Lake City. They picked a spot, set up their tents, and planned to stay the night. It started raining hard early in the evening. A lot of people packed up and left, but my aunt and her group decided to wait it out. After a while, the rain stopped, so they made a small campfire and tried to enjoy the night. They talked, ate, and passed the time. Later, after it got dark, the rain started again. This time, the other couple didn't want to deal with it. They packed up and left, saying they'd rather drive back than sleep in the storm. My aunt and her boyfriend chose to stay. They put out the fire, got into their tent, and tried to settle in for the night. The rain kept coming down, steadily and loudly onto the tent. At some point, my aunt heard something that didn't match the sound of the rain. She said it was footsteps. At first, she thought she imagined it, but then she heard it again. It sounded like someone walking nearby, not too far from their tent. She sat up and listened, and then said that she saw a quick flash of light through the tent, like a flashlight turning on and off. She said her first thought was that it might be a park ranger coming to tell them to leave because of flooding. So she called out, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped right away. That woke up my uncle. She told him what she had heard. They couldn't hear much over the rain, and that made it harder to tell what was going on. They talked quietly about what to do. They were far from other campers, and there wasn't anyone close by to help. They agreed that if they heard anything again, they would leave. So they stayed still and listened. Minutes went by, and nothing happened. After a while, they started to calm down and laid back down to try to sleep. Sometime later, both of them woke up at the same time. They heard the tent zipper slowly being unzipped. Someone was opening the tent from outside. She screamed, and my uncle reacted right away. He grabbed the heavy metal flashlight that he kept next to him, and he swung it towards the door as hard as he could. The flashlight hit something solid, and they heard a person gasp, then the sound of someone running away into the rain. They got out of the tent and ran towards their truck, which was parked about half a mile away. It was still raining, and they didn't stop until they reached it. When they got there, they found one of the back tires had been slashed. They didn't have many options, so they got in and drove anyway. Somehow, by going slowly, they managed to make it out of the park and reached a gas station a few miles away. They used a payphone to call 911 and report what happened. The next day, they went back with the police to collect their things. The officers looked around the campsite and found footprints all around their tent. They said the prints appeared to belong to a man, but they never found out who it was. During a camping trip with friends years ago, we witnessed something we couldn't explain. We were sitting around the fire deep in the forest off a logging road in British Columbia. We were not drinking or smoking, as it was a dry trip for a friend. I noticed my good friend went silent and perked up like he was listening. He told us to shut up and listen. The forest was dead quiet with zero noise. Before, there had been frogs, birds, and regular forest sounds. He said something like, "Guys, there could be a cougar or bear around because the forest is silent. We might want to move to our cars." Before anybody could react, in the far tree line maybe 100 feet away, we saw something that completely put us all in shock. It was a small red orb, glowing like fire, producing its own light going between the trees. We watched it, flabbergasted. It was clearly passing behind and in front of trees. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then slowly faded. After about 10 seconds, the forest sounds resumed. We all just sat there in shock after that. We took a very quick look around, and there was no road or anything in the woods. It couldn't have been cars or any other vehicle. It freaked us out so much we left and found a campsite with people and stayed there. We still bring it up from time to time when we get together. It gave me nightmares for weeks. I have no clue what it could be, and it's a 50-50 shot if people believe it when we talk about it. A couple of additional points. We are all experienced campers and have done these trips for years. We've heard weird sounds, bright flashes in the sky, and encountered some sketchy people out in the bush before. Nothing unexplainable, but just wild stuff, so we knew how to react and think in these situations. The friend who noticed the lack of sound first is in the bush almost 6 months out of the year as he does forestry work, so he knows the woods more than anyone. He was terrified to go back to work for months after this experience. He never wanted to talk about it or mention it, as he said it made his hair stand up. So more about the light experience. When I say the forest was dead quiet, I mean completely quiet. I could hear the fire crackle lightly, but that was it. It was like the air had been sucked out of the forest itself. I could hear my heart beating. To go from so much sound to nothing instantly kicked in my fight or flight. It was primal. Something in the back of my head was like, this is a bad situation. Then, seeing that red light, it flickered and shined like a glass ball about the size of a beach ball filled with fire. It produced its own light, and a faint glow passed into the trees as it passed. It was traveling about walking speed between the trees. It was a heavy bushed area, so you'd hear someone walking through. Once my eyes locked onto it, I felt a fear I had never experienced. I'll say this, I almost died a couple of years back, and that wasn't as scary as this light. It was like my brain was trying to figure it out, but couldn't. Once it faded and the forest sounds resumed, everything in my body said to run. We barely said anything to each other as we all got up. We exchanged a few looks and words, and all confirmed what we saw. There were 6 of us. We decided to get a closer look, I guess out of the hopes there would be an explanation, but there wasn't. We couldn't explain it, and that made it worse. We left and found a paid campsite about 20 to 30 minutes away at around 1 a.m. In the morning, the owner of the campsite came by and greeted us, as people don't usually show up that late. We explained what happened sort of jokingly, as it seemed so strange. Her face turned to stone, and she was super serious after we explained. She explained that the forest we were in is an extremely old growth forest, which makes sense since my province has some of the oldest forests still standing in the world. She said it's not uncommon to hear stories like that. She asked a bunch of questions, and we talked about it for a while. I have no idea what or why, but it happened, and it was for sure there. We have on multiple occasions talked about it. I have no idea why, but it happened, and it was for sure there. We have on multiple occasions talked about it. Whenever we do talk about it, I have nightmares. Even just thinking about this and writing this gives me the creeps. In the mid to late 1970s, my parents were in a camping club with about 5 or 6 other couples, and they camped at various campgrounds together around the Midwest. One time, we went to this campground that had a little park near a large pond with a playground not far from the water. My sister and I were playing in a sandbox when I was around 10 years old, and she was a bit younger. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this boy, who was probably about 12 or 13, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans with patches on the knees, was standing in the sandbox a few feet from us. He had long black hair down to his shoulders and dark eyes. He didn't say anything for a couple of seconds, and my sister and I looked at him nervously, as he wasn't smiling and was staring down at us. He finally said something, and asked if we were brother and sister, and I told him we were. He asked where our camper was, and stupidly, without thinking, I told him the section of the campground my parents' club was camping in, which was about 2 blocks away. He then asked the name of one of the couples camping in our parents' club and if we knew them. I told him yes, and the boy said that they were his aunt and uncle, and he was going to surprise them later. He went on to say that he was camping with his dad, and he gestured vaguely in a direction on the other side of the pond. The kid squatted down close to my sister, and she backed up in the sand closer to me. He said, "Do you guys want to come to my camp? My dad brought tons of snacks, and I can give you marshmallows to roast if you want." I told him my parents already had marshmallows. This conversation went on for a bit, as he listed all the snacks that he had and wanted us to come and try them. My younger sister finally said she needed to go to the bathroom, which I took as my cue to get away from this weird kid who was really starting to make me feel uncomfortable, even at that young age. I told him, "We're going back now. We'll see you later when you come to your aunt and uncle's camper." He didn't get up when we got up, but instead leaned closer to us. He said, "There are bathrooms right down that road," pointing again past the pond. He added, "It's by where our camper is. You can take her there and stop by and get some candy for my dad." I told him there was a bathroom right over by the main office, which was just across the street from the playground, and I said we would just use that one. Suddenly, the boy jumped up, kicked whatever my sister and I had been building in the sand, and jumped out of the sandbox. He yelled, "You're so dumb! Who turns down free candy?" My sister and I rushed over to the office building, and I was fearful that he would follow us there. But after a few seconds of staring at us, he turned around and began to run down the path towards the other side of the pond. I took my sister into the men's room, she did her thing, and we cautiously looked around for the boy, who was nowhere to be seen, before we hurried back to our campsite. Once there, I told my parents about what happened, and our parents' friends happened to be sitting on the picnic table having coffee with them. We told them it was their nephew who was going to surprise them. Of course, they said they didn't have a nephew, and were a bit weirded out that someone knew who they were. My sister and I stayed at the campsite for the remainder of our time there, and of course, the creepy kid never did come to our campsite.
One night, in the middle of nowhere, I had a freaky situation happen to me. I was visiting my grandma, who lived out in the middle of nowhere. She had a house on the lake, and to get there required driving down a long dirt road for many miles. It wasn't a very popular lake, so she didn't have any neighbors, the closest houses being at least a mile or 2 away. Because it was such a long drive, whenever I visited, I would just naturally stay the night in her guest bedroom so that I wouldn't have to drive long, tiring hours in the darkness. One night when I was visiting my grandma, I was sitting out on her back patio just hanging out listening to music. It was close to midnight, and my grandma had gone to bed already, so I was just enjoying the nice night air while sitting outside on my phone. Over the sound of my music, I thought I heard something banging or clanking around. There was a steady breeze that night, so I just expected it to be the wind moving something and making noise down by the boathouse. However, as the night continued, I also saw some quick flashes of light from down by the dock and the boathouse, and I knew that somebody had to be messing around down there. I was nervous because I was out in the middle of nowhere and isolated enough that there shouldn't be anybody nearby, let alone looking around down by my grandma's boathouse. I thought about calling the cops, but decided against it because it would take over an hour for them to arrive most likely. Instead, I turned off the music and went inside to grab my grandma's revolver, which I knew she kept loaded. Upon coming back outside the patio, I saw occasional movements of light down by the boathouse, so I decided to confront whoever it was now that I had a weapon. I called out to stop messing around by the dock and to reveal themselves and leave the property. I assumed that whoever it was would simply just leave without revealing who they were, but to my surprise, the figure of a tall, skinny man stepped out onto the dock. Illuminated by the moonlight, all I could see was his figure at first, but as he approached, I saw that it was an older gentleman. He casually began walking up the dock and towards where I was standing on the back patio, as if he had been doing nothing wrong. He didn't say anything as he slowly kept approaching, so I yelled out to stop and leave the property or else I'd shoot. I thought for sure that would be enough warning for him, but he just kept coming up the lawn towards me. I finally took a warning shot right above his head to stop him from advancing. After I had fired the shot, he put up his hands and spoke to me for the first time, saying to take it easy and relax. Fully creeped out by the demeanor of this old skinny man, I told him to leave immediately or I would shoot him. The man stood still for a couple seconds, and I thought that he might start walking towards me again and I'd have to shoot him. However, he turned back and walked out into the woods, back down to the left of the dock, and disappeared. I was worried the rest of the night and didn't get much sleep, half expecting him to come back, but he never did. I'm not sure what his deal was and why he was so comfortable and nonchalant about approaching me while at gunpoint. The following morning, I warned my grandma about it, just in case he ever came around again. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I live in the countryside of Ireland, far from the nearest town, out in the middle of nowhere. It's usually pretty quiet, which is nice. Most nights, the only sounds I hear are the occasional cow escaping the field next door or my dog barking at someone walking by. But about 2 years ago, I heard something really strange. It was late spring, and the night sky was clear. I remember stepping into the kitchen around midnight for a snack. As I rummaged through the cupboards, I began to hear noises outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the sounds only grew louder. I opened up the window to listen better, and I saw my dog standing by the back door. She wasn't barking, which was strange because she usually barks at anything, especially animals. Instead, she was focused on the forest behind our house. The noise was hard to describe, but it was like metal being scraped, but it had a croaky quality to it. I didn't like it, and the fact that my dog was scared made me uneasy, because she was a big dog and not easily frightened. I couldn't understand what could be out there, so I decided to bring her inside and go to bed. But as I lay in my room, the sound seemed to follow me. It shifted to the front of the house, which didn't make sense. I shut my curtains, hoping to block out whatever was outside. Just as I got comfortable, I heard a tap on my window. It was soft at first, but then it became a steady tapping noise. It sounded like stones being thrown against the glass. I stayed under the covers, just listening and hoping that it would stop. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I mentioned the night to my neighbors. That's when I found out a man had moved into a house just around the corner. They said he wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, and he had a history of trouble with the law, so much so that whispers about him being a drug dealer floated around. About a month later, a massive stash of drugs was discovered in a shed nearby, and we never saw that man again after that. Thinking back, I can't shake the feeling that he might have been trying to scare me that night while he was high or something, but it was just all so strange. Like, how did he create that sound for hours, and how did the sound move around the outside of my house so quickly? What unsettled me the most was the thought of what could have happened if I had gone to check on the noise. I'm still not 100% sure of what it was, but it freaked me out. A few years ago, I visited some friends out in Oregon who lived on a secluded 300-acre property in the middle of nowhere. We were deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and the sounds of nature. On the second evening, we were sitting around a fire pit enjoying each other's company as the sun was setting, making the whole sky orange. There was a total of 6 of us there, and 2 of my friends had brought their kids who were busy making s'mores. The others were having casual conversation, and I was comfortable in my folding chair, leaning back and zoning out, just staring into the darkness. After a while, I noticed something strange. I kept staring at this one particular tree, trying to figure out what I was seeing. After I kept looking at it, I deciphered what looked like a giant hand wrapped around the trunk of the tree. I quickly turned to my friend Anthony, who was sitting closest to me, telling him to take a look at the tree. I motioned with my hand, telling him the direction to look. He also couldn't determine what he was seeing at first, but I told him to just keep looking and focus on it. Finally, he saw what I was seeing and whispered to me, "Is that a hand?" It blended in so well with the bark of the tree, but the more we looked at it, the more certain we were it was a massive hand gripping the tree. The fingers were thick, almost like tree bark. They had ridges and cracks, giving them a rough appearance. It was bizarre, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I felt goosebumps cover my arms as we both stared at the hand. It was about 15 meters away, and it didn't move at all. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The kids were laughing and joking around the fire, and we didn't want to alert anyone else in fear of scaring the kids. After 8 long minutes, the grip of the hand suddenly loosened and disappeared behind the tree into the darkness of the forest. The movement of the hand disappearing confirmed to both Anthony and I that it wasn't an illusion. Anthony and I looked at each other wide-eyed and speechless, feeling that we had seen something that didn't belong in our world. Later that night, we finally got up from our chairs, and we wanted to check out the area where we had seen the hand. We walked towards the tree. When we reached it, we both paused, taking in its massive trunk. It was at least 2 feet in circumference, and it was hard to imagine how something with a hand could be that big. I inspected the ground around the base of the tree, looking for any signs of footprints, scratches, or anything that could explain what we had seen. But there was nothing. No imprints in the dirt, and no smell like you would expect from a wild animal. I've heard tons of stories of man-like creatures residing in the deep woods, and I'm a believer now. Whatever that thing was bigger than any regular human, and based off the size of the tree that its hand was wrapped around, it had to have been huge. This is a true story of something that happened to me and a few friends a couple of decades ago when I was still a teenager. My family had just moved from a big city to a quiet area in England, basically in the middle of nowhere. My new house was half a mile from an old ruin of a castle called Barry Pomeroy. The locals always said that the castle was haunted, but tours of the castle were regularly given during the daytime, so I didn't really believe it. One night, a few of my friends and I thought it would be fun to explore the castle at night. It was around 9 p.m. when we went to check it out. There was still plenty of light to see, but the summer sky was darkening. We walked up the valley, taking the steep footpath to the castle's gatehouse. We knew that we could sneak in pretty easily by climbing over a ruined wall, and at this point, they didn't employ guards yet to keep people from sneaking in at night. Once inside, we moved through the old dining room and climbed the ramparts to take in the views. It was dark by now, and the moonlight cast long shadows everywhere, making it a bit creepy. We were having fun though, and eventually decided to check out the dungeon. As we descended the stone staircase, we noticed tiny candles flickering on the steps. Tours for the day had been finished for many hours now, and the candles were freshly lit. At the bottom, we found what looked like a shrine. There were candles arranged in a circle, and something was drawn on the wall behind it. I don't remember the details of the drawing, but it felt eerie. The candles and the thought of someone else being in the dungeon area made us uneasy, so we quickly went back up the staircase. When we reached the top of the staircase, I realized my friend Alan was missing. I called out his name, and after looking around, we saw a figure walking around on the ramparts. He must have chickened out and never came down to the dungeons, even though we thought he was with us. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. Alan was coming up the stairs after lagging a bit behind, and was asking why I was shouting his name. Sure enough, I turned to see Alan standing behind me now. My heart dropped as we looked back up towards the ramparts. The shadowy figure I had seen that I thought was Alan was still up on the ramparts, watching us. It didn't move for a moment, then slowly slipped behind a pillar and vanished. We were all on edge now and decided it was best to leave. We hurried back the way we had gotten in, climbed over the wall and headed towards the footpath through the woods. As we walked, I glanced back at the castle. It loomed in the darkness, and I noticed the figure again. This time, it was perched on top of the wall, moving along it as if it was following us. As quickly as we could, We hurried down the path, trying to keep our footing in the uneven ground. When we reached the bottom of the valley, I looked back again. The castle seemed even more imposing now. This time when I looked back, I saw a faint blue light glowing on the wall. It drifted slowly, then disappeared over the edge of the castle. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. That was the first and last time I ever experienced something I couldn't explain. I thought maybe it was just some guy trying to scare us off, but I couldn't shake the image of that blue light fading away. It looked so supernatural, and I began believing that the castle indeed was haunted. When I was about 13, my family lived in a remote area in the middle of nowhere, Canada. One winter night, I decided to unwind in the hot tub on our deck. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and the world was quiet, blanketed in knee-deep snow from a recent snowfall. As I sat there watching the trees and listening to the night sounds, something caught my eye. Emerging from the darkness of the woods was a massive wolf. It was unlike any wolf I had ever seen. Its silver coat shimmered in the moonlight, and its green eyes pierced through the night. The wolf walked along the fence that bordered the property. For a moment, it paused and locked eyes with me. I was up on the deck, and the wolf was far away below, but I was still terrified, and I sat as still as possible, waiting to see what would happen. The wolf continued on its path towards the barn where our horses were kept. As it approached the barn, there was a light on the outside on the other side that illuminated the inside just a bit. The barn was dark inside, but I could clearly see the outline of the wolf moving through the barn. Halfway through the barn, the shape of the wolf totally shifted. It was like it morphed into something more human-like, although it was big with broad-shouldered, and seemed to stand at least 7 feet tall. The horses weren't skittish at all and were completely silent, which was strange. The tall figure rounded the corner, but did not appear on the other side of the barn. I strained to see if it would re-emerge from behind the barn at some point, but it never did. It must have just vanished into the darkness on the other side of the barn. I had no idea if there was a trick going on with the light and shadows inside the barn, but I had no idea what I had just seen, and I had never seen a wolf that big. Later, I found that my brother had experienced something similar. He told me that he woke up one night feeling a strange sensation, like he was being watched. When he looked out of his window, he saw the same large wolf walking away from his window. I have yet to see the wolf again, and I wonder if I ever want to.
This happened back when I was in middle school. I believe it was my 8th grade year. Back then, I would consider myself to be a pretty average kid. I was a decent student, but during that school year, I remember there was this kid named Jake who was in my grade, and I did not get along with him. Jake wasn't really part of my friend group, and he always seemed to be a little bit more of a troublemaker. He would skip class a lot and things like that. I knew these things because I happened to have a bunch of classes with him that year, and the year prior as well. I don't exactly remember how it started, but I felt like he hated me and was always rude to me when we would have to talk to each other during class or something. One day at school, somebody in my friend group mentioned how Jake had casually said some negative things about me. Of course, I wasn't around when he said it, and it made me really angry. I ended up confronting Jake after class in the hallway, and I said some things that I probably shouldn't have looking back. It got a little bit heated, and some friends sort of had to calm us down. After that, a day or two went by without us speaking to each other or anything. Then came that memorable day. I don't remember exactly what day of the week it was, but probably later in the week. The classes that I had with Jake were 2nd period and 3rd period. Both classes went by without us so much as looking at each other. As far as I was concerned, I was going to ignore him for the rest of the school year. Then, during 5th hour, I had gotten to my classroom and was on my phone waiting for class to start. I saw that I had received a text message from a new number. I opened it, and it said that it was Jake, and he wanted to patch things up with me. He then said that he wanted to meet me during 5th hour for 5 minutes at the South End bathrooms. I considered this, and at first didn't want anything to do with him. But then, I thought about it again and figured that it would be best to sort things out with Jake. As much as I was angry with him, I didn't want to go into high school having enemies, and I thought maybe Jake would apologize to me or something like that. I texted Jake back that I would, and he texted back saying that he would be waiting. So when a good time in class came, I asked my teacher if I could go to the bathroom, and he said yes. I then walked down to the south bathrooms. The south bathrooms were the farmost bathrooms at the end of a hallway. They were popular because of how out of the way they were. My classroom was sort of far away, and it would take me almost 2 minutes to get there. I was lucky that my teacher for 5th period was not that strict, and we mostly just did busy work, so he wouldn't really care if I was gone for a little bit. As I was probably 3/4 of the way there, suddenly I heard noises come across the school speakers. At first, I was really confused. I didn't know what it could be. Then I saw a teacher a ways up come walking out of their classroom. When she saw me, she called me over to her class. I went with her, but I still had no idea what was happening. She told me that we were in a lockdown now, and I had to stay inside her classroom until it was over. I could see that there was no other students inside the classroom. I recognized her, but I never had a class with this particular teacher. She told me that she did not have class during this hour. Her and I waited inside her classroom for maybe 10 minutes until the lockdown was lifted. It was very fast, and I remember that afterwards I was sent back to my original classroom. When I had made it back there, I was only there for like a minute, and then the principal herself knocked on our classroom door. I then was asked to go with her. All of these things happened really fast, and I was confused until I was later told what was going on. Apparently Jake had invited me to talk to him at one of the bathrooms, and then told one of his friends that he didn't plan to talk to me when I got there, but to, quote, mess me up bad. I was told that he was seen by another student walking to the bathrooms with a possible weapon. What weapon he had, or what he was using as a weapon, I never found out, and I don't know if I want to. Anyways, when the kid saw him, he reported it to his teacher, which caused the lockdown. He was quickly found, and luckily, the teacher spotted me before I made it to the bathrooms. Jake ended up getting expelled from our school for this incident. When I was in high school, some classes I liked, and some classes I really hated. One of the classes that I found especially boring was economics. Part of it was the teacher that I had. He was nice, but a really boring guy to listen to. Plus, he would often give us packets to work on, instead of more interesting ways to learn. Because of this, I would occasionally go for longer bathroom breaks during class. It was my final class of the day, so at that point, I was struggling to just stay awake, and I couldn't wait to get home. I remember that one day, it was in the fall, and I got to econ class and was extra tired. It was Friday and it had been a long week, so about 15 minutes into class, I asked if I could use the restroom. The answer was yes, which is what it typically was, and I walked out and into the hallways. I always felt good leaving a classroom when class was going on. I walked down to the nearest bathrooms and went inside. Nobody else was in there, and I went inside one of the stalls. As I was in there, I took out my headphones and put them in. Then I started playing some music on my phone and scrolled through Instagram. I would say about 5 minutes later, I got up and left the bathroom. When I got out into the hallway, I paused my music and took out my headphones. Then I walked the rest of the way back to class. When I got back to my classroom, the door was locked. I tried opening it a few times and then knocked on the door. I saw my teacher, Mr. Phelps, look out at me from the window. Then he opened up the door and let me in. When I got inside, I saw everybody in the class was sitting on the floor at the back of the room. They all looked at me as I walked in. Mr. Phelps told me to sit on the floor with the rest of the students and that we were under a lockdown. When I got to the back of the class and sat down, I asked if it was a drill. The kids around me were shaking their heads and saying no. Somebody asked me if I had seen anything. I told them no and explained that I just went to the bathroom and I didn't see anything at all. We all stayed sitting on the floor in the back of the classroom for probably like 40 minutes or so. I don't know exactly how long it was, but it sure felt like a really long time. None of us knew exactly what the lockdown was for, and we didn't hear anything out in the hallway either. There were a few times when somebody asked Mr. Phelps if he knew what was going on, but he always told us no. At last, the lockdown finally ended, and we were allowed to go home. Everybody wanted to find out why we had been under a lockdown in the first place, and within a few hours, everybody knew. But it hit me harder than most. The lockdown had been caused by a suspicious man breaking into the school. He was seen very shortly after entering, and when questioned by a teacher as to who he was, he ran. That caused the school to go under a lockdown, and the authorities were called. When police arrived and searched the school, it took a while, but eventually the man was found. He was found hiding inside of the bathroom, the same one that I had been in just before. I was clueless that there even had been a lockdown going on because I had my headphones in. I'm glad that I was, though, because I probably would have been scared about it. I do wonder how long after I had left the bathroom the man got there, though. I'm currently a high school math teacher. This story takes place a couple of years ago. I worked at a different high school, and I won't say where it is, but I was also a math teacher at that school as well. There, school went from 7:50 a.m. to 2:40 p.m. every day. When school ended, I would stay after and grade assignments and prepare class for the next day. I never really knew exactly how long after I would stay, but usually a couple of hours. One day, I was in my classroom by myself and had just finished grading a bunch of assignments. I would guess that it was about an hour and a half after school had ended. I went down the hall and printed off some things that I needed for class the next day. Then I went back to my classroom to do a few more things. As I was working on and preparing for the next day's lesson, suddenly I heard a sound come over the school speakers. The phone on my desk rang as well. I picked it up and I heard in the automated tone that the school was going under a lockdown and this was not a drill. This was unusual and I had never experienced a lockdown before. School was not going on, but there were still many teachers there and some students who were involved in after-school activities. I went over to the door, locked it, and then turned the lights out in the classroom. Then I went back to my desk. Of course, I was very curious why there was a lockdown going on, and I texted another teacher who I was friends with. They didn't know either, however, and I decided to just keep working at my desk. About 30 minutes passed, and we were still under a lockdown. I sat at my desk, working, when I thought I heard a slight noise. At first, I couldn't tell if it was coming from the hallway or inside my classroom. I stopped what I was doing and listened. I could now hear more clearly, but it didn't make any sense. It sounded like somebody was inside my classroom. I looked all around it, but didn't see anything strange. I sat there silent, just looking around my classroom for a good 2 or 3 minutes in a row. The noises stopped for the most part, but then, finally, I saw one of my cabinets in the back. It looked like there was a shoe sort of sticking out of one of them. The door was also cracked open a few inches. I couldn't tell if I was really seeing this at first. I kept watching it until I actually saw it move a little. Then it moved back inside the cabinet entirely. When I saw this, I felt a large rush of adrenaline, but not in a good way. I knew there was somebody hiding in my classroom, and I did not know who they were. I texted a teacher down the hall that I knew, who also happened to still be there, and I told him what happened. I told him that I was going to head over to his room. Then I got up from my desk and tried not to panic as I walked over to the classroom door. When I was walking, it felt like forever, but eventually I did make it to the door. Then I unlocked it and walked outside of the room and into the hallway. From there, I walked a ways down the hall until I got to the classroom I was headed to. I was let in and felt much safer in there. We were able to report to the school the person in my classroom then. I couldn't believe that somebody had been hiding in my room. And sure enough, he was found, still hiding in my classroom. It was a guy who was on drugs, and he had broken a window in the back of the school and came inside. I really don't know what he was capable of, or why he had chosen my classroom to hide in, but I'm sure glad that I saw him when I did. This happened many years ago when I was much younger. It was the school year, and a typical weekday for me. This meant that I had to walk to school. It wasn't all that bad though, because my family lived in a rather warm climate, and the walk to school would take me a good 15 minutes. I would go a few blocks down my street, and then connect to the sidewalk on a slightly busier street. Then my school was only a couple of blocks away from there. One day, I walked to school just like any other. It was dark outside, because it must have been shortly after daylight savings or something. But I just know that about halfway to school, I noticed that there was a guy walking on the sidewalk behind me. I turned fully around and looked at him because of how unusual it was. In all of my walks to school, nobody had ever walked on the sidewalk near me, except sometimes another student who lived closer. It was a pretty quiet area for the most part. This guy was rather tall and had sort of long hair. I did remember his face and that he had sunglasses on, which was weird. I think what I got suspicious of the man, though, was how he acted when I turned around. Turning around, I expected him to look at me or maybe say something. I wasn't trying to talk to him, but he was only like 20 feet away. When I did, he stopped and kind of looked around inconspicuous. It was as if he was just looking into the woods next to the sidewalk that we were on. I turned and kept going to school. When I did, I heard the guy now walking a ways behind me still. This continued for probably 5 more minutes. I had made it within maybe 2 blocks of school, and that's when it sounded like the man was starting to walk much closer to me. I was now scared, and I decided to start running the rest of the way to school. Whoever that guy was a real creep. Luckily, I made it to school safely, and the guy wasn't following me anymore when I got there. I went inside and got to my first class. That school day was normal until 3rd period. About midway through the class, our teacher told us that we were going into a lockdown. This meant that all doors had to be closed and locked, and all lights had to be turned off. The teacher stopped teaching, and we all pretty much just had to sit there and wait. Our school was not all that big, and we never had lockdowns, so this was very scary for us. I remember feeling nervous, but I didn't even connect the man that had been following me earlier for some reason. It took a long time, I think about an hour, but finally the lockdown ended. When it did, we resumed our normal classes. For the rest of that school day, it was pretty normal, but it didn't feel that way. I think everybody was busy thinking about why we had a lockdown, but nobody told me. I was just told that things were now safe for us. When school got out that day, my mom was there to pick me up instead of the usual routine of me walking home. When I got in the car, she asked me if I was okay from being in a lockdown. I asked my mom if she knew what it was for, and when we got home, she told me. She said that there was a guy hanging out behind the school, sort of hiding in the woods. He ended up being arrested for trespassing, and when I saw his picture, immediately I recognized him. It was the same guy that had followed me to school. Of course, I told my mom this, and we then told that to the school. The guy actually lived in a house that I passed every day on my walk to school. It's very creepy to think about, and I feel lucky to be all right. When I was in high school, during my senior year, I was a teacher's assistant for a gym class. This was great for me because I've always liked sports and athletics. I was the assistant for a teacher, Mr. Robertson, who had been my personal favorite gym teacher. Being an assistant for him was great because occasionally I would get to play the games the class was playing with them. Other times, I would do actual work, like help set things up or help to grade a few assignments that the class had. The class was the second hour for me, and one day we were going to play kickball. We used those large mats that can fold up as bases, and Mr. Robertson asked me to go get some from the storage closet when class started. This was a bit of a trek. The storage closet was outside of the gym and a ways down 2 different hallways. It was pretty inconvenient, but our school was sort of old, so off I went to get the 3 mats. Luckily, they had those flat carts, so you could just wheel the equipment in, and that made things a lot easier. I got to the end of the hallway, which didn't have any classrooms attached to it, and was only used for storage rooms. Then I opened the storage closet and looked inside. Once inside, I saw inside the dark, cluttered closet and turned on the light. Turning on the light switch didn't do a whole lot of good, and it was still pretty dim in there, but it was better than before. I looked around the room until I found the mats. When I went to grab them, though, I suddenly and clearly saw some random guy come out from behind a large box. This guy had long, stringy hair and a baggy, short-sleeved shirt on. I turned and ran out of the room, closing the door behind me. When I made it outside of the room, for some reason, I had it in my mind to hide in one of the other storage rooms in that hallway. Looking back, I wish I would have just ran all the way back to the gym, because I probably could have outran that guy, but it was sort of a long ways, and for whatever reason, I quickly found a storage room, got inside, and hid. I heard the door to the storage closet open like 5 seconds after I hid. I then quickly went behind some large object that I couldn't see because it was pitch black in there, and then held my breath. I was careful not to make a sound. I heard footsteps walk out into the hallway and get closer. The footsteps slowly continued walking, and then they got quieter. It sounded like they passed by the room that I was hiding in, but I couldn't quite tell. I took my phone out of my pocket and quickly turned the brightness down. Then, I attempted to text one of my friends what was going on, but I had no signal in there. I wanted to leave, but I had absolutely no idea where the guy was now. I sat there waiting and trying to hear some kind of noise to indicate where this guy was. However, I wasn't hearing anything at all. I thought about going back to class, but every time that I did, I just kept picturing the guy waiting right outside the door for me. The real problem was that I had no way of contacting anybody to tell them what was going on. I stayed there. I don't know how long I was there, but eventually I heard over the intercom outside in the hallway that there was a lockdown going on. I figured somebody must have seen that guy, but was he far away from me now, or was he still right over here? I was banking on him being far away, and I decided that I could leave now. I got up from my hiding spot and took a few steps towards the door. But literally, right when I was about to open it, I heard footsteps coming my way. I didn't know whose they were, but given the fact that the school was under a lockdown, I figured it was that guy again. I stopped where I was and tried to be silent. The footsteps walked closer and closer at a fast and steady pace. Eventually, they reached me, but passed by the room that I was in. I was pretty scared at that time, and I did not want to leave anymore. I slowly and quietly made my way back into my hiding place. Some time went by before I once again heard footsteps. They were coming from the same direction that the guy had came from before. This time, the footsteps got right outside the room that I was in, and then it opened. Light poured into the room, and I saw a police officer stood in the doorway. I was really glad to see him, and I ran out of the room. He told me that they knew where the other guy was hiding, and that I didn't have to worry about it anymore. I was returned to my class, who was locked down inside the gym. The guy was caught a short time later. Looking back at this, it was the scariest moment of my high school career. I really don't know how the guy got inside the school, but I'm glad everyone was okay. I was 14 when this happened, and it was the middle of February on a Friday night. My friend Tyler and I were at my house watching random videos and playing games in the basement. It was already late, maybe around 11. My phone buzzed, and it was a text from a girl named Megan who lived a few miles away. She asked if we wanted to come hang out for a bit because her parents were gone and she was bored. We decided to sneak out without telling my parents because they would have said no for sure. We lived in the country in southern Virginia, so walking places wasn't unusual for us. Megan's house was about 4 miles away. We had walked there before during the day, but never that late at night, and definitely not when it was that cold. It was around 0 degrees outside. We grabbed coats and gloves and headed out. To get to her house, we had to walk up my gravel driveway, which is long, then turn onto a narrow road with no streetlights. After about a mile, the road passes a small pond and then meets an old railroad line that hasn't been used in years. The tracks run straight for a few miles and cut past a small row of trailers and a couple of scattered houses before you reach the woods near Megan's place. The walk there was quiet. Snow covered most of the ground and the sky was completely dark. There wasn't even a moon that night. About halfway there, we passed a small white house near the tracks. The guy who lives there keeps several hunting dogs. At night, he locks them in a large fenced kennel beside his yard. Every time someone walks by, they start barking like crazy. We stayed on the far side of the tracks when we went past. The dogs heard us and started going wild, slamming into the fence and howling. Tyler laughed and we jogged a little bit until we were farther down the tracks and the noise faded. After that, we kept walking and we reached Megan's house a little before midnight. We stayed there for a few hours just talking and watching TV. Around 3 a.m. we decided to head back home. The walk back started the same way as before, quiet and dark. When we got close to the area with the trailers and the dog kennel, we slowed down. The dogs were already barking again. They weren't barking towards the tracks where we usually walked. They were facing the trailers across from them. They kept jumping against the fence like they were trying to get at something. We stopped about 50 yards away. Tyler said he didn't like it and thought something was over there. I told him it was probably a raccoon or another animal messing around near the trailers, and we kept walking. We were almost past the last trailer when Tyler suddenly grabbed my jacket. He gasped and pointed towards the bushes near the corner of the trailer. Right as I turned my head, someone lunged out from the dark like they were trying to grab me. I only saw the shape of a person moving fast. We ran without saying anything. We didn't slow down until we were off the tracks and running up my driveway. We went straight inside and locked the door. My parents were asleep upstairs and had no idea that we were gone, so we didn't want to tell them anything. We stayed in my room and talked about what had happened. Tyler kept saying someone had been crouched next to the trailer watching us before they jumped out. I brought my dog into the room and shut the door. We finally tried to sleep around 4 a.m. I was half asleep when I opened my eyes and looked towards the window beside my bed. A face was right there on the other side of the glass. A man was staring into the room. I yelled as loudly as I could. My dog started barking and jumping at the window. By the time my dad rushed into the room and turned on the light, the person outside was gone. My dad grabbed a flashlight and checked the yard while my mom called the police. They drove around the road and tracks for a while but didn't find anyone. The next morning, I texted Megan and told her what had happened. She replied a few minutes later and asked if it was near the trailers by the railroad. Apparently, someone had broken into one of those trailers that same night. No one ever figured out who it was. After that, Tyler and I avoided walking those tracks at night. This happened when I was 16. It wasn't that long ago, but it's the one night I still think about when I can't sleep. Back then, I had just figured out how easy it was to sneak out. My parents went to bed early and my window opened right into the side yard. I hadn't been caught doing it at all yet, so I snuck out at night quite often. That night, I texted a guy I'd been talking to from school. We weren't officially dating, but we liked each other. He lived a few streets away and suggested we meet behind the middle school near his house. There was a large soccer field behind the school. At the far end, there was a line of trees and a small playground. A walking trail ran along the side of the field and connected to a neighborhood behind it. We met up around midnight and sat near the edge of the field where the grass met the gravel track. From there, we could see the back of the school and the parking lot lights. But it was dark enough where we were that nobody would notice us unless they walked right over. We had brought a vape and were passing it back and forth, talking about random stuff. After a while, I heard footsteps on the gravel. We both looked towards the trail that ran behind the school. A guy walked past the parking lot lights and onto the path. I remember he had a hoodie on and he was pushing a bike next to him. He didn't look at us. He just kept walking along the path and disappeared behind the corner of the school. We didn't think much about it. It's not like we owned the place, so we kept talking and messing around like before. Maybe 10 minutes later, we heard the same sound again of gravel crunching. This time, the guy came back from the same direction he had just gone. He walked slower when he reached the part of the path that faced the field. He stopped and stood there on the path. It felt like he was looking out across the field, maybe at us, maybe not. We were far enough away that I couldn't be sure. After maybe 30 seconds, he started walking again, but instead of staying on the path, he stepped off the gravel and onto the grass. That's when we decided to leave. There's a narrow trail that cut through the trees that led into a neighborhood with a bunch of small houses. It was darker that way, but at least there were more streets and places to go. We grabbed our stuff and started walking fast towards the trees. I kept looking back, but it was hard to see anything across the field. The trail through the trees was almost completely dark. When we finally reached the other side, we came out onto a small street with houses and porch lights. I felt a lot better immediately. We started walking down the sidewalk, trying to figure out which way would take us back to the main road. We were talking again, laughing a little about how paranoid we were. We turned around at the end of the street, right where the sidewalk met the road. The same guy was standing there with his bike. He was just standing in the middle of the sidewalk, looking right at us. Then he jumped on his bike and began riding towards us as fast as he could. I remember saying, "Go," and we both took off. We didn't even think about where we were going. We just started running down random streets. We cut between houses, jumped a couple of fences, and ran through someone's yard because we knew he couldn't follow us there on his bike. After a few minutes, we ducked behind a parked truck in someone's driveway and just crouched there for a while catching our breath. Eventually, we stood up and looked around. The street was empty. We slowly walked back towards the main road so I could head home. Lucky for us, we both made it home safe that night. But I'll never forget the feeling of my heart sinking when we saw the bike guy blocking our way out. By far one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. This happened when I was 17. I grew up in a small town, and my parents were strict about curfews. One night, I snuck out to meet some friends at a guy's house about 2 miles away. I'd done it a few times before and had never had any trouble. Around 2 a.m., I decided to head back to my house. There were 2 ways home. One was along the main road, which looped around town and took about 40 minutes. The other was a shortcut through a stretch of woods and an empty field that cut the walk almost in half. I'd taken the shortcut plenty of times, so I went that way. My phone battery was already low when I left. I turned the flashlight on anyway as I crossed the field towards the tree line. It was quiet out there as there were no houses nearby, no cars, just the sound of insects and the wind moving through the trees. As soon as I stepped into the woods, my flashlight on my phone went out as it had died. I knew the trail well though. There were a few things I always used to make sure I was still on it. A big rock near the entrance, a fallen log you had to step over, a big pine tree halfway through, so I knew where I was going and I just had to slow down a bit without the light. I kept walking slowly, using my feet to feel the path. After maybe another minute, I smelled cigarette smoke ahead of me and I stopped walking immediately. I had no idea where the smoke was coming from though, so I just continued on my way, hoping I wouldn't bump into this person. A few seconds later, I heard a twig snap, and then another. The sounds were behind me and getting closer. Whoever was out there smoking had started moving also now, so I instinctively ran. I couldn't see where I was going too well, and branches were hitting my arms and legs as I pushed through them. At some point, I must have left the trail because the ground got uneven and thick with plants. Because of this, I tripped and fell down hard. I stayed there on the ground. I banged my knee on the fall, so I just sat there for a bit, trying to barely breathe. The footsteps kept coming. I heard someone mumbling something under their breath. I couldn't make out any words though. Then, suddenly, a flashlight clicked on. The beam moved slowly through the trees. I kept my head down and stayed still. The light passed a few feet away from me, then swept back again. After a few seconds, the flashlight switched off again, and I heard footsteps gradually continuing away from me. I waited a few more minutes before I got up. The problem was that I had no idea where the trail was anymore. I had run straight off it, but I figured if I kept moving in one direction, I'd eventually reach the road. So I started walking slowly, trying not to make any noise, and eventually I found the trail again. I knew the exit wasn't far now, and if I could reach the fence at the end, I'd be out by the streetlights. A few minutes later, I saw a faint light through the trees. Relief hit me right away as I sped up to get back to the street and the lights. But as I got closer, I saw something standing right at the opening of the trail, a silhouette of a person blocking the exit of the trail. I stopped walking and weighed my options. Maybe it was someone else, but I knew most likely it wasn't. I was tired and scared and just wanted to get out of there. I was a big framed boy standing 6 feet tall, so I decided to run for it. I took off down the trail straight towards the exit in a full sprint, not really sure yet if I would try to barrel through the person or juke them if they were hostile. The figure got larger as I got closer, but still didn't move. Right as I reached them, they shifted suddenly towards the edge of the trail, trying to grab me or something as I juked and kind of squeezed by them. I felt a hand brush the back of my hoodie like they had tried to grab it. I jumped over the small fence gate at the end of the trail and ran onto the road under the streetlight. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block near the first house. When I finally looked back, the trail entrance was empty. I got home, climbed back through my window, and didn't sleep much that night. I never used that shortcut again. Not during the day, and definitely not at night when I would sneak out. This happened when I was a junior in high school. Back then, my friends and I had a routine on weekends. We would tell our parents that we were staying at different houses, but we actually ended up at the same place. One of the guys in our group lived outside of town in an older house with a lot of land around it. It was far enough away that no one ever really bothered us there, and his parents were always doing something else, but also didn't even care if we were around. There were usually 7 or 8 of us, mostly couples and a few other friends. We'd watch movies, play games, eat junk food, and stay up most of the night. Late one Friday night, we got hungry and decided to drive to a place that was open all night near the highway. It was about 10 minutes away and had a couple fast food places and a gas station. We piled into one car and headed out. On the way back, we were on a long, dark road that led towards the house. There weren't many homes out there. As we drove around a bend, we passed a man riding on a bicycle on the side of the road. It was after midnight, so that alone made it strange that someone was biking out there. There weren't any streetlights out as well, and it was cold that night. He turned his head and stared right at the car as we went by. Everyone in the car noticed it. Someone even said something like, "Why is that guy biking out here this late?" We laughed about it for a minute, but it left a weird feeling. A few minutes later, we pulled into our friend's driveway and parked behind the house like we always did. The back door was the one that we used since it was closest to where we parked. We went inside and started eating in the family room. Maybe half an hour later, there was a knock at the back door. The guy who lived there looked at us and asked if anybody was expecting someone. No one was. His parents were out of town that weekend, so it was just us there. He walked over to the door, but didn't open it. There was a small window next to it, so we looked through that first. Then he stepped back and he said quietly, "It's the guy from the road." Immediately, a few of us got up and moved farther into the room. I remember my heart beating really fast. I went halfway up the stairs with two of my friends so we could still hear what was happening. From the stairs, I could see the door, but not the person outside. Our friend cracked the door just a little, but kept the chain on. The man was standing there right on the porch. He said he was thirsty and asked if he could have some water. His voice sounded calm, but something about the situation felt wrong. The road where we saw him was a few miles away. I couldn't understand how he had ended up at the house, and how he even knew it was there since it sat back from the road. The guy who lived there said to wait a second and went to the kitchen. He filled up a glass in the sink. Then he went back to the door and opened it just enough to pass the glass through the gap. The man took it and drank the whole thing while standing there. Nobody else said anything. We were all just watching. When he finished, our friend told him he needed to leave. The man handed the empty glass back and said thanks. Then he stepped off the porch and walked around the side of the house towards the front. As he went, he looked through the windows. I could see his face pass by the living room window looking at everyone for a moment before he disappeared. Maybe he really did just want water. But the thing that still bothers me is how he found that house. The driveway was long enough that you couldn't really see the place from the road unless you already knew that it was there. And the last time we saw him on the road, he was several miles away. Our conclusion after talking about it more that night was that he had some sort of malicious plan in mind, but he might have been scared away once he saw the number of people that were in the house. When the car passed, he might have just seen the two girls in the front seat of the car and thought that he could get lucky or something worse. The summer I turned 14, I stayed with my cousin for a few weeks in the town where she lived with her dad. It was a small town with one grocery store, one gas station, and a park by the river. At the time, it felt exciting to be somewhere different, even if it was quiet. One night, we were bored and couldn't sleep. It was some time after midnight. We decided that it would be fun to sneak out and walk to the river trail. Her dad already had gone to bed, and the house was dark. We slipped out the back door and walked down the gravel road behind the house. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, talking about random things and laughing because we thought we were being rebellious. About halfway to the trail, I noticed someone behind us on the road. The guy was wearing dark clothes and a cap pulled low with his hands in his pockets. Neither of us said it out loud at first, but we both had the same feeling that he was following us. We turned into a side street and ducked behind a row of parked cars in front of an empty house. We waited behind the car crouching. After maybe a minute, the man walked past the corner. He slowed down and looked around for a second. Then he kept going down the main road. After he disappeared from sight, we ran the whole way home. The next morning, her dad was watching the local news while making coffee. We were in the kitchen when the story came on. A woman had been attacked late the night before on the same stretch of road we had walked on. It happened around the same time we were out. According to the report, someone assaulted her while she was walking home. My cousin and I just stood there looking at each other. We never told her dad about sneaking out that night, and we didn't want to talk to the police either. At the time, we were scared we'd get in trouble for leaving the house. Looking back now, I wish we would have said something, as maybe it would have helped that woman out. Back when I was in college, I went to Florida one year for spring break with a few of my friends. It was going to be us 4 girls staying in a hotel near the beach in Florida. We were all very excited for the trip, as we had planned it months in advance. When spring break came, we all flew down to Florida together and soon arrived at the hotel. It was a pretty nice place, not fancy or anything, but was overall nice. We were up on the 5th floor, and the hotel was just a few blocks from the beach. For the story, I'm just going to give my friends very basic names, Jenna, Sarah, and Anna. So we had a large room for the 4 of us all to stay in, and it had plenty of space as there were sort of 2 rooms in it. There was a sort of living room area and then a bedroom and bathroom. It wasn't massive, but it was pretty nice. The first day there after arriving, we went out and did some fun stuff and had a good time. The second day was great as well. However, that night is when the story really starts. So I remember that Jenna said she was leaving to get something, I can't remember what, but she said she would be right back. Maybe it was another towel from the front desk or something like that. Anyways, she said she would be back soon and then she left out the front door. Probably like 2 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I had realized that Jenna probably had forgotten a key to the room and she was knocking to get back in. Anna asked who was there, and I told her probably Jenna. So Anna, who was closer to the door, just walked over and opened it without even looking. As soon as she did, I remember seeing this man standing there. He was pretty tall and I hadn't seen him before. He then started to walk right into the room and didn't even say anything. Thankfully, Anna had a good reaction. She saw him entering and quickly slammed the door back shut. The man thankfully backed up and left the room, or else he would have had the door shut on him. And Anna hit the lock to the door and then looked at me. We were both shocked. Sensing the commotion, Sarah then came over and asked what had happened. We all went around and looked through the peephole, and the man was now gone. As we were all talking about it, a few minutes later, Jenna returned. She told us that she didn't notice the guy out in the hallways, and she wondered if it was possibly a mistake. But I didn't think so. It seemed crazy how he saw us and then still tried to walk right in, and he didn't say anything either, so I didn't really think it was an innocent mistake where he just had the wrong room. For the rest of the night, he didn't come back or anything, which was good. The following day we went out again. We stayed out late and got back to the hotel at probably like midnight. However, I was hungry and so was Jenna, so I decided to order something on Uber Eats. A while later it arrived and I went down by myself to pick it up in the lobby. I was not thinking about the guy from the previous night. However, after I got to the lobby and picked up the food, I saw him again. The lobby was pretty much completely empty at this hour. When I started walking away, I saw the man turn and start to walk after me. I didn't even know where he had come from, but he now seemed to be following me potentially. So I walked back and headed towards the elevator. But I knew that it would take a long time to wait for the elevator potentially, so I decided to take the stairs instead. I walked past the elevators and down a hallway. As I did, I heard footsteps a ways back, still coming in my direction. It was just me and this guy out in the hallways. I made it to the stairwell and entered it. Then I started quickly walking up the stairs. As I had made it up a couple of flights, and I was about at the second floor, I heard the door open to the stairwell below. The man was definitely following me. I hurried up and went faster. I couldn't see the guy, but I could hear him, and it now sounded like he was running up the stairs. So I started to run. I made it up a few more flights to the 5th floor. I didn't look back, and when I got to the door, I opened it and then sprinted down the hallway towards our room. As I was running, I got the key ready. When I approached the door, I heard the man then running down the hallway after me. I was able to unlock the door pretty quickly and then get inside the room. When I got inside and closed the door, I instantly looked out the peephole and then saw the man. He didn't try to enter the room, but he just walked away down the hallway. This guy was seeming like a big problem, and that wasn't the end of him. That very same night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone trying to open our door. I knew it was the same man, but it was more than trying to open the door. It sounded like maybe he was trying to pick the lock or something. I instantly got up and ran to the door and saw him there through the peephole. Then I called 911 and woke everybody up. I also called the front desk. Thankfully, an employee from the hotel came up to our floor pretty quick. This scared the man off and caused him to run away. By the time the cops got there, he was gone though. However, he was on lots of security footage and the police felt confident that they would find him. For the rest of our trip there, we didn't see him anymore. Still, it was a really scary experience for us. I'm not sure what would have happened had I not gone back to the room as fast as I did, or had the door not been closed right on him the night before. When I was in college one year, I decided to drive and visit a friend for spring break. We both had spring break at the same time. My friend attended a school that was about a 5-hour drive away from mine, but neither of us had any plans, and her college was larger and in a city with more things to do, so we made plans for me to stay there. She also had space at her apartment, which was nice. So I packed up a few things for the week and left my campus after classes and was going to do the whole drive that same night. My last class got out sometime in the afternoon, and so I was hoping to arrive by maybe 9 or 10 p.m. that night or so. The first part of the drive there was kind of a lot of traffic, but once I really got out there on the highway and it got past about 6 p.m., things started going really smooth. After driving for a really long time, I was out there kind of in the middle of nowhere. I stopped right off the highway at a rest stop to use the bathroom and also get some gas. When I went there, I was not there for a very long time. Something weird happened though when I left. I was inside the building and came back to find a car parked right next to mine when there hadn't been one there before, In fact, it wasn't that busy, and there hadn't been any cars on either side of me for several spaces. This was not the weird thing though. When I got back in my car, as soon as I left, the car left as well. It was like as soon as I backed up, this car started backing up, and then when I started to drive away, it did too. I found that a little interesting, but still not too big of a deal. It could still just be a coincidence. So I left and got back out onto the highway, and the other car was behind me. It was probably like 20 minutes later when the car was still behind me that I started to think it was really weird and potentially suspicious, because I hadn't been in the same lane the whole time. I had passed a few people and stuff. I just had the thought that maybe the car was following me, so I decided to slow down and see. I was already in the right lane, and I went down to slightly below the speed limit. I expected the other car to pass me, and most normal ones would, but it did not. Instead, the car just slowed down with me and continued to follow. I was getting paranoid, so I decided to take the next exit, and I did. I made a random turn, not even knowing where I was. I was still about an hour from my friend's college. The car made the turn too. And then I had the brilliant thought to drive to a police station. I had to look one up on my phone, but there was one about 10 minutes away. So I put in the directions and then I drove there, and the car followed me the entire time. The car even pulled into the police station parking lot after me, but then it continued to drive through the lot and then left. When I saw the car go, I was relieved, and I didn't bother to go in and report it or anything, although I should have. Instead, I waited there for a couple of minutes, and then I left and continued to my friend's place, confident that I had lost the person who had been following me. When I was driving the rest of the way, it seemed to go well. Eventually, I reached the exit of the highway for my friend's college, and a short time later, I arrived. I parked in the parking lot to her apartment building, and then she let me inside. Her place was on the 4th floor of the building. I remember that minutes after arriving, I happened to look out the window and I noticed a car driving through the parking lot. It looked like the same make and model of the car that had been following me. The same color, too. I remember thinking to myself, that's a coincidence. But then I looked to the car, and the more I looked at it, the more I thought that maybe it was the same person. The car was just slowly driving around the parking lot. Then I saw it park in a space. I told my friend about what had happened, and we watched from the window. After parking, nobody got out of the vehicle. We watched for a while. Maybe 5 minutes later, a man finally got out. He then walked through the parking lot to the apartment front doors. However, he could not get in because they were locked, and he clearly didn't live there. The guy then just stood around the doors. My friend then yelled at the man from the window. She said if he didn't leave now, she was calling the cops. He looked up, and I quickly jumped back and out of the way so he wouldn't see me. I heard the man say something back, but I couldn't tell what he said, and neither could my friend. But surprisingly after that, the man walked away and left. I have no idea if he knew where I was going or was able to continue following me, because I'm not sure how he knew to go there. After that, I didn't see him again though. Still, it's absolutely crazy how he followed me for over an hour driving. And I will admit, after I thought I lost him, I didn't pay that close of attention to my surroundings. But I thought that I would have noticed if he was still following me, but I guess not. Years back, my friend Skylar and I went on a spring break trip together. We went to college together in a small town in the Midwest, where the weather was very cold. We planned a trip to Southern California for spring break. I remember that when we arrived, it was a lot of fun. Personally, it was my first time in California, and I enjoyed almost everything about it. There were some good beaches where we went, and it was just nice to be in sunny, warm weather and not doing school. A few days into the trip, and I remember that Skylar and I were on the beach getting a tan. Seemingly out of nowhere, this woman came up to us. She appeared very well put together, possibly wealthy, and invited us to a party that night. It might sound weird, and she mainly spoke with Skylar, not me, but she asked us where we were from and talked a little. She then invited us, saying it was an exclusive party and they were inviting people who seemed to fit the vibe. She then said that there would be over 100 people there, and there was going to be free drinks, and it would be a lot of fun. Taking her word for it, we decided to go. Us being young college girls, we thought that maybe there would be a celebrity there or something. Plus, the woman seemed legitimate, like the party she had something to do with would be upscale. She even gave us a small laminated business card with the date, time, and address. So we went back to our hotel, and then that night at the correct time took an Uber to the address. It was almost 30 minutes away. We arrived and the address was hard to find. I'm not sure exactly where it was looking back because I don't remember exactly and I don't have the card, but basically it was in an area with tons of buildings and streets. We walked down a sidewalk a little bit to find the place. Eventually we had to walk down this sort of back alleyway. It was dark out and we were starting to question the whole thing. However, we then saw this door open. It looked like the door had come out of the backside of a garage or something, and that garage appeared to connect with a larger building. The buildings around there were hard to describe. Some of them looked like houses, some of them I couldn't really tell what they were, but many of them were modern. When the door opened, this man wearing sunglasses waved us to go inside, so we walked over and entered the building. When we got in though, the man quickly walked away. He went through this other doorway and didn't say anything at all. Then he shut the door behind him before we could even get close to it. And meanwhile, as soon as we got inside, it was pitch dark in there. You could barely see a thing. We couldn't tell exactly where we were, but it seemed like a sort of lobby room or maybe like just an entrance room. But once the man had left this room, it was now entirely dark, so you literally could not see a thing at all. The door that we had entered through closed as well. We tried to get to the door the man had gone through, but now couldn't find it because we couldn't see. Eventually, we did get to it, but it was locked. We took out our phones and put our flashlights on. It revealed that we were in this very small room, probably about 20 feet long and 10 feet wide. It was still hard to see even with the flashlights, and the walls were this black carpet material and the ceiling was dark colored too. Even the doorways had the same wall as the rest of it with the carpet material, so it was really hard to tell where the doors even were because they were basically hidden and blended into the walls. We had just barely located the handle. We tried knocking on that door, but nothing happened. We tried yelling as well, but got no response. By this point, we were sketched out and decided to just leave. The card had no number on it or contact on it. It simply said the date, time, and address, which I think we were at. We felt around the wall for the handle of the door to leave, but when we finally did find it, that seemed like it was locked too. The floor was also this black carpet as well. It was really strange. We started to panic and began yelling and banging on the walls. It felt like we were locked in there. Also, our phones had no signal in there. It was like the room was blocking it. Both of us kept banging on the door to get out, yelling and fiddling with the handle trying to open it. Eventually, out of nowhere, after like 5 minutes of this, it just opened suddenly. We both went back out into the alleyway. It was almost like the door had been locked and somebody had unlocked it. I'm not sure what happened, but when we got back out, we ran out of there to a busier street. We then took an Uber back to the hotel. We never reported it or anything. I wasn't even sure where it was. Unfortunately, we dropped the card at some point in either the room or maybe the street, so we really had no evidence or anything. I still don't know what was going on there, but it was really weird, and I'm glad we got out when we did. This happened back when I was in college. I went to a university a few hours from my parents' house, and I lived there. For spring break one year, I didn't have any plans but to go back home and hang out. It was nice to have a break from my classes, and I left campus and went back to my parents' house. For an entire week, my only real expectations were to get a lot of sleep and to play video games in my bedroom. My older brother had already finished college and lived across town, so I was now the only one living there aside from my parents. After a good relaxing weekend, I began my weekdays of relaxation as well and started gaming. My parents both left for work in the morning and I was home alone and in my bedroom. This was upstairs and at the front of the house. I had a window that overlooked the front yard and the driveway and stuff. So as I was in there gaming, probably about an hour after my parents had left to work, I randomly saw a car pull into our driveway. The neighborhood is pretty average, so I thought that it was just a car that was going to turn around and drive the other way. The street is usually quiet, but there's a lot of houses around, so an occasional car is not a surprise. However, the car stopped and was sitting in the driveway for a while. I didn't recognize it and had no idea who it would be. My next thought was that maybe it was a door-to-door salesman of some kind. I had no plans to answer the door if that was the case. I continued to watch out of curiosity. A guy wearing a hoodie then exited the vehicle. Most of his head was concealed by it, other than his face, which I didn't get a good look at from my angle. The man then walked up the driveway, but turned to go towards the back side of the house and not the front door. This was really suspicious. He was quickly out of my sight, and I wondered what was going on. I then decided to leave my bedroom and go look. I went to a window upstairs that overlooked the backyard. I saw the man standing in the yard and looking around. Then, after like a minute, he casually walked back around the house and then over to the front again. I switched back to my room. Then I watched the guy walk back to his car and then get inside and drive away. I was really confused by this. However, he didn't try to enter the house or knock on the door or anything, so I pretty much just moved on. I did not tell my parents, and I played video games all day, forgetting about it. However, that same night I stayed up late gaming, which is no surprise. My parents had already gone to bed, and I was back in my bedroom in the same spot. It was probably like 1 o'clock in the morning or so. I remember that I heard the sound of a car driving up towards the house. I looked over once again to see a car pulling into our driveway. Now this seemed really suspicious, and I remembered the car and the man from earlier. This looked to be the same car. I felt dumb for not telling anybody about it. I watched the car stop once more and then turn off. After a short time, the door opened and it was the same guy, even wearing the same thing. He then started walking around the house again. This time, I left my bedroom and went downstairs and went to a window that looked out back. By the time I got downstairs, though, I heard the man trying to open our back door, which was locked. Then I heard him walking towards one of the back windows. I turned on a light and then turned on the back porch light as well. As soon as I did, I heard the man start running away. He went back around the house, got into his car, and then drove off really fast. I was unable to get a license plate or anything, which I felt stupid about, but I did call the police and report it and told my parents as well. The rest of my time at home that spring break, nothing else like it happened, and the man was not found that I'm aware of. But I'm really glad that I noticed the guy when I was home. If I had not been there, he may have been able to break into the house without my parents knowing. The first time he went there must have been scoping it out, but the way he did made it seem like he had been there before. Perhaps when I was gone at college he did. Maybe he knew my parents were both gone at work and didn't take me into account. I'm not really sure, but I'm just glad that he left when I turned on the lights. Something crazy happened a couple of years ago during spring break. My friend Emily and I went to the beach for spring break. We're not from an area that had beaches at all, so this was a great experience. We went to the ocean literally every day and had a great time there. There was also a lot of other people there, with it being spring break time for many schools. One of the days, after laying out on the beach for a long time, Emily and I left, but then realized that I forgot my phone at the beach. I'm not sure how exactly that happened. I think I just didn't see it and forgot. So when we were at our hotel, I realized, and then we went back to the beach and tried to find it. We also saw if they had a lost and found or something, but had no luck. So then Emily decided to call my phone. When she did, surprisingly, somebody answered it. My phone did not have a passcode at the time for some reason, so you could just go on it. After answering the phone, Emily asked who it was, but there was no answer. She told whoever was there that they had my phone, but the person still said nothing. Still, somebody had to be on the other line for them to answer. We heard nothing at all from them. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, they hung up. We tried calling back, but had no luck with that. Whoever had the phone didn't answer. So at that point, I felt bad about it and figured that I should just get a new phone somewhere the next day. We tried calling back again later, and Emily sent a text as well asking them to return the phone, but there was no response to anything. We went to bed that night and hoped for the best. However, in the middle of the night, I remember waking up. As soon as I did, I heard the distinct sound of somebody trying to open the hotel room door from the outside. I was instantly wide awake. I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a random guy standing there who I didn't know. He then knocked on the door, and I saw him holding my phone in his hand, at least it appeared to be my phone. Had he come to return it? The guy looked sketchy, and I didn't think Emily had given out our address or anything, so how was he here? I decided to take a chance. I yelled from the other side of the door, "Is that my phone?" The man looked up suddenly like he was surprised, but he didn't say anything. I told him that he could just put it on the ground. I was nervous to open the door. He still did not say anything, and he did not put the phone on the ground. I asked him if he wanted money. He still said nothing. I almost opened the door, but thought better of it. By now, Emily had woke up and came over to see. This guy was being really weird. I wanted my phone, but he wasn't communicating at all. Then the man finally spoke. He said to let him in and he would give the phone back. I made up a random excuse on the spot to try to get him to not come in. I said, "My dad is sleeping in here. I don't want to wake him up." As soon as I said that, the man turned around and just started walking away. It was like when he realized I was possibly with my dad, he wanted to get out of there, which made him only seem more suspicious. After that, he was gone. However, Emily looked on her Snapchat and saw that my location was shown as being there at the hotel, so that meant that the man was on the app. I thought that he would not give me the phone back. However, the following day there was a text back to Emily. It appeared as though a new person had the phone. The text said that they had just found the phone on the ground next to a sidewalk. They had picked it up and saw the texts when trying to find the rightful owner. We met up with this person who was a completely different guy. I think the original guy dumped the phone after realizing he couldn't get in the room. I'm glad that he did, but the whole thing was really sketchy.
I go to Target all the time. It's the main place where I do most of my shopping. The store has just about everything you could want, from groceries to electronics. It's also nicer in my opinion than competitors like Walmart and Costco. Anyways, this is something that happened last year that caused me to not go there for a while. It happened one night when I went to do my normal grocery shopping. I think I got to the Target a little bit later than I usually do. It was maybe like 8 o'clock at night. When I got inside, I got a cart and started walking around the store getting things. At one point, I remember that I was towards the back corner of the store in the grocery department. That's when I first noticed this one woman that was inside there. This woman was somewhat short, thin, and had long, kind of messy hair. What stood out about her the most was that she was just standing in like the exact corner of the store and staring at me. She didn't have a shopping cart or basket and wasn't holding anything. It just seemed really odd. I was getting something back there, maybe 30 feet away from her. I spent maybe a minute in the area, and when I was leaving, I walked sort of past her. I glanced and noticed that she was still staring at me. This was really weird. I mean, she hadn't really moved at all. What was she doing? As I walked away, I could feel her still staring at me. I certainly didn't know her at all. I moved on to another section of the grocery department. From there, I continued my shopping. Probably 10 minutes or so went by, but that's when I noticed her again. I was in an aisle, and there were a few people scattered around here and there, but I noticed a ways behind me, like 30 feet or so, was the same woman. I didn't really look at her to see if she was staring at me again or not. I really just noticed that she was there. I kept shopping like normal and was soon in another aisle. I saw the woman there as well. This was pretty weird to me. I still ignored it though and didn't let it bother me. Soon I was done shopping. I then walked to the front of the store towards the checkouts. When I was walking there in a more open area, I noticed that the woman was trailing me. She was remaining a sort of far ways behind me, but was certainly following me. I really didn't know what to make of this. I got in line and waited to check out. When I did, the woman did not get in line behind me, but instead stood just inside of the clothing section, which was adjacent to the checkouts. Soon I was able to pay for my items and then be on my way. I walked out of the store, not bothering to look around and see if the woman was still following me. And I didn't notice her at all until I had made it to my vehicle. I got to my car, which was a smaller SUV. I opened up the back rear door and put several bags of groceries inside of it. That's when I saw the woman again. This time, she was just standing in an empty parking space, which was across and one over from my car. So she was once more maybe 30 feet or so away. I don't know if that's exactly how far away she was, but it's just my estimation. Anyways, I thought for just one brief second about talking to her. I was curious as to why she was being so weird, but I decided not to. I didn't know what she was capable of, and so I finished unloading the things and closed my trunk. Then I walked around to my driver's door and got inside. But just after I got inside my car, I heard the rear hatch open up. I looked back and saw the woman literally climbing into the back of my SUV. I asked her what on earth she was doing. At this point, she started climbing over the rear seats of my car, heading straight for me. It was a terrifying moment. When that happened, I decided to just leave my car. Again, I had no idea what she was planning to do. I took my keys out of the ignition and then got out of my driver's door. Then I basically just ran back inside of Target. The woman did not leave my car and chase after me.
When I was safely inside, I called the police and reported the incident to them. I waited inside Target without seeing the woman until the police arrived. When they got there about 10 minutes later, I spoke with them briefly. Then they went to my car to look for the woman. She had left my car, but was found a short distance away, trying to break into another vehicle. After the police had apprehended her, I went back and looked at my car. Overall, it was fine, but inside, she took all of my groceries out of the bags and opened several things. It was really weird. This incident caused me to not go to Target for a while, but I have since returned. I really don't know what that woman's problem with me was. I used to work at a Target department store as a cashier. I worked there for almost 6 months, but ended up quitting. The scariest thing that happened was one random night when I was working a night shift. I don't remember what time I started or exactly when I got off either, but I was working as a cashier and helping countless customers. The store was decently busy, and there was a steady amount of people at my register. I remember towards the end of my shift, this guy with a beard came into my line. I don't recall what he bought, and we had a very normal interaction. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary, but I did remember him just because of his beard. It was very long and memorable. So anyways, he walked away and then I helped the next person in line behind him. Probably 10 minutes or so after this, it was time for my final break of the night. I turned off the light to my check lane, helped the final customer, and then left. I walked to the front of the store and went down a quiet hallway to where our break room was. The break room had several tables, chairs, a refrigerator, and a TV. I sat down at a table and was the only person inside the entire break room at that time. So I just went on my phone like usual and caught up Snapchatting with friends and whatnot. About 5 minutes later, I noticed somebody come into the break room out of the corner of my eye, but I didn't really see them. The person then walked over and sat down right next to me at the table. When I looked up, I saw that it was the same bearded man from just minutes before. I was so confused as to what he was doing here. He didn't work at Target, so why would he be in the break room? The man told me that I had to go with him. I was asking him, "What are you talking about?" He said that we should go right now and was pointing towards the exit. There was an employee's entrance down the hallway from the break room. I asked the guy who he was, and he said that he would tell me later. Then the man stood up and said once more to leave with him. Now, obviously, this seemed crazy to me, and I had no intentions of doing so. Then he started to grab my arm to get me to stand up as well. I stood up but resisted, and I tried to start to walk away from him. When this happened, I suddenly heard the door open from behind. I looked back and saw one of my coworkers, Brian, entering the break room. He looked very confused by what he was seeing. I remember that the man tried pulling my arm to get me to go with him again, but I was still resisting. That's when Brian asked what was going on. The man finally let go of my arm and then ran away towards the employee's exit. I went over to Brian and told him the story. I said that I was so happy he walked in when he did. Looking back, I don't know what would have happened if he didn't. Brian went to see if the guy had left, and he did. Another coworker came into the break room a short time later, and we all talked about what happened. After that, I went back to work and finished up my shift. For the next several days, everything was fine. I worked one other time without any kinds of problems, but I remember that my next shift after that, I was working at night again. Things had been going by like normal. I had a few customers in my checkout line at probably about 9 o'clock. I remember that I casually looked up and suddenly saw the same bearded man in line. He didn't have any items with him. I had a really bad feeling about this. When it was his turn, I told him that I was going to call the police if I ever saw him again. The man laughed a little and said that he would be waiting for me when I got off. Then he just walked away and left. I went straight for my manager after that and told her about what had happened. We decided to call the police. They came out and we spoke with them about the situation. Then they went into the parking lot and actually found the man standing in the parking lot near my vehicle. It gave me the creeps when I heard that. I'm really glad that we called the police. I ended up getting a restraining order against the guy and haven't seen him since. This is something that took place many years ago when I was a child. I believe I was about 7 years old. One day, I went shopping with my mother and younger sister at Target. It was a common place for my entire family to go and get whatever. When we got there, my sister was sitting in the shopping cart and my mother was pushing it. Then I was walking alongside her. We walked around the store getting things for a while. I remember that we got to like the back end of the store, sort of near the corner. I don't remember what department it was, but it was not the groceries, I know that. So as my mother was shopping around, somehow I wound up in like the next aisle over from her. I'm not sure if I was distracted by something on the shelf or what, but I was still really close by. That's when I saw a Target employee approaching from I'm not even sure where. It was a man wearing the classic red shirt and khakis. He approached me, and I just remember he asked if I wanted to see something really cool. Of course I did, and I said yes. Then he told me to follow him and started walking away. But he didn't go very far before there were these doors that led to the back room. I had always seen these doors in stores, and I knew that I wasn't allowed to go past them. I had also always wondered what was behind those doors and what was in the back room of the store. So he opened them and told me that I could go in. I was really curious, and I also thought that it was so cool that he was showing me this. I walked in after him, and then he closed the doors behind us. It was almost like he was giving me a tour, and he was pointing at stuff and telling me what it was for. I remember that he said that's where they kept all the items before they went out into the store. We continued to walk farther into the back a little bit. By now, I had sort of forgot about going back to my mother and sister. I was just really interested in what I was seeing. I felt like it was okay that I was back here because this guy worked at Target. Then I remembered that this other guy, who also appeared to be an employee, walked over to us. He said hi, and then the three of us kept walking. Then I remember seeing this other door that led to outside. The men told me that I should see where the deliveries were made, and said that I could go outside. This is when I first had a bad feeling. For some reason, I hadn't found it to be a problem to walk in the back with the men. But now that I was being asked to actually go outside, it felt completely different. I knew that my mother would be upset if I left the building. I stopped, even though they were encouraging me to leave. I said no thanks, and then started to walk back. My mother was probably looking for me, and I said that I had to go back to her. I remember the two guys were saying it was fine and she was okay with it, but I knew that they hadn't spoken to her, so I got more suspicious then. I started to kind of walk back towards the back doors that we had come in through. That's when one of the men started walking towards me aggressively. That was enough to make me start running away. I sprinted as fast as I could towards the back doors. I heard the guy running right after me. I remember that I just barely reached the doors and opened them. The man reached me right as I did, but my mom was right on the other side of the doors and saw me come out of there. The man noticed this and then turned and ran away. My mom asked me why I had been in the back room. When I told her the story, she went back there herself with me to see if the men had gone, but they weren't back there anymore. The back door that had been open leading to outside was also now closed. I remember my mother found one of the store managers and it led to a big thing. I don't really remember much else after that. Looking back though, I'm just really glad that I realized when I did to go back to my mother. I don't think either of those men really worked at Target at all. For some background to this story, I'm a female. This happened when I went to Target last year to do some shopping. I was going to be getting quite a few things. I went to Target maybe once a week on average and got groceries and other stuff. Sometimes I would spend a long time there, and it's been one of my favorite stores for a long time. I went there one night after work, and it was maybe 7 p.m. or so. I was shopping around, getting a lot of the normal things that I usually did. At one point, I was sort of in the middle of the store. It was at the start of the clothing section, but also near some aisles with other things like games and sporting goods. It was at that moment when this man approached me. He said hi, and then said that he had to show me something funny. He said to follow him quick. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I did follow him. I left my cart and we only went like one aisle just around the corner.
He showed me some Lego product on the shelf and made a joke about it, but I didn't really understand it. I don't even remember exactly what he said, but overall, I was just kind of confused. I just know that I laughed to be nice, and it was kind of awkward. Then the guy said that's all, and he told me to have a good night. So I walked back over to my cart, and then continued with what I was doing. I didn't really think much of the interaction after that. I would say I spent maybe 10 more minutes inside the Target shopping. Then I checked out and left. I got back to my house and then unpacked everything that I got. At this time, I lived in a smaller house by myself. So that very same night, after I went to bed, I woke up sometime. I'm a really light sleeper, so I didn't really know what woke me at first, but I just knew that it was a little bit after midnight. I was going to just go right back to bed, but then I heard a noise coming from the other room. That made me completely awake and more alert. I listened to the noise and couldn't tell what exactly it was at first. I was so curious, so I got up and left my bedroom. Then I moved towards the back of the house where the living room was. That's where the noise was coming from, and right when I entered the room, I saw someone at the window. I couldn't tell any details about them, but could just see that someone was right outside the window. I stopped where I was, just about a step into the room, and I didn't go any farther in. Then I saw that there appeared to be another guy at my back door. 2 people were outside of my house. To me, it seemed like the noise was actually coming from the back door area. It wasn't very loud, and I didn't really know what exactly they were doing. I ran out of the room and into a small closet in my hallway. I decided to hide in there, and then I called the police on my cell phone. I said that I thought 2 people were possibly trying to break in. Now, I didn't turn on any lights or anything when I got up, so I don't think the men knew that I was awake. As I was hiding in the closet, I realized that. I considered leaving the closet to turn on a light and see if that would cause the men to leave my property, but I couldn't gather up the courage to do so. I was hidden in the closet and did not want to get out. Inside of it, though, I could barely hear the noises. If I was completely still, I could just sort of hear them. They seemed to come and go. And that went on for the next several minutes. But the police ended up getting there much faster than I thought they would. Probably 5 minutes after I made the 911 call, I heard more louder noises. At first, I was scared by it, until I realized that the people talking were police. I left the closet at that point and realized that nobody had broken in. After that, I went to the window and saw the police with 2 men. It was at that point that I recognized one of the guys. He was the man that talked to me earlier that same night when I was at Target. I was really confused as to what was going on. The police told me that the men appeared to be attempting to break into my house. I told them how I had seen one of the guys at Target and stuff. There was a whole investigation done, and I found out some shocking details. An AirTag was found inside of my purse. It had been in my shopping cart when I was at Target. The first guy must have distracted me, while the other guy put the AirTag inside of my purse. Why they chose me, I don't know, but I'm really glad that I woke up so easily and called the police before the men were able to get inside of my house. I used to work at Target. This is something that happened back in 2017. Back then, I was a senior in high school and working as a cashier part-time. I would work a lot of afternoon to night shifts, and there were some other people around my age who also worked there. I made a few friends with some coworkers over the months that I was at Target. There was one coworker in particular, though, named Evan. He always seemed kind of strange, and it wasn't just me that thought that. Some coworkers talked to me about some weird things that he would say, or strange things that he would do. He worked in another department of the store, I can't remember where. But aside from saying strange things or somewhat creepy things, he would sometimes just stare at people. One thing I noticed in particular was he would sit in his car across from mine a lot. He was around my age, so we would often work similar shifts, and I would always park in the same general area of the parking lot. Many times when I got off of work and walked out to my car, I would get in only to see Evan already sitting in his car, and his car would be facing mine. He would often just be sitting in his car, kind of staring at me. I would usually leave pretty quickly then, and I figured it to be a coincidence at first. I mean, it didn't happen every time, but it did happen quite a bit. One time though, I knew for a fact that Evan got off of work about 3 hours before I did. When I got to my car that night, I was shocked to see him sitting in his car still, and he was staring at me. I quickly left like usual, and he stayed there. I figured that maybe his car was broken or something. I really didn't know why he was often there like that, but I wasn't jumping to any conclusions. One of the next times that I worked though, Evan did not work. Everything went by pretty normal. I think I got off at 9 p.m. and then clocked out and left to head home. During this time, I lived with my parents, almost 10 minutes away from the Target. When I got back to my car, I saw Evan was once again sitting in his car across from mine and looking at me. He wasn't wearing his work clothes and hadn't worked at all today, so I found this to be odd. But like most times, I just started up my car and then left. However, when I left this time, Evan actually left right after me. After leaving the parking lot, I went onto the road and then merged onto the highway. Evan was still following me in his car at this point. I hadn't noticed this happening before, so I drove most of the way home, not knowing if he was following me or not. I mean, I didn't know where he lived. When I turned off the highway though, he did as well. I drove all the way to my street, which was pretty close by. After pulling onto my street, Evan did the same. Now I knew that I couldn't go to my house, so I drove past it. Then, when I reached the end of my street, I turned and went back onto a busier road. I remembered then to go to a police station when you're being followed, so when I got back onto the highway, I put in directions to the nearest one, and Evan continued to follow me all the way there until I pulled in. Then, at that point, I saw him start to turn around on the road in his car. I stayed in the parking lot of the police station for several minutes, and then left to go back home. I felt much better now that he wasn't following me anymore. When I was driving back home, I was careful to look behind me and stuff. I didn't notice him at all. Soon, I had reached my street. When I pulled onto it though, there was this car parked on the side of the road. I saw it start to move after I passed it, and I realized that it was Evan. He must have somehow known this was my street. I didn't know what to do, so I just pulled into my driveway. Then I got out of my car as quickly as I could and ran inside the house. When I got in, I saw Evan's car on the side of the road out front. I didn't hesitate and I called the police. But then, just about a minute later, he left. The police came out and I told them of the situation. I could give them a lot of details about Evan because I knew his name and where he worked. After that, the next time that I worked at Target, I reported what happened to my manager. I learned that Evan had been fired recently from Target for inappropriate behavior, and not long after that, I found out that he had actually followed home another coworker a different time. He had also recently been arrested for stalking yet a different woman. This guy was a total creep. I'm really glad that I don't have to worry about him anymore.
I'm a female. I work a pretty standard job in an office 5 days a week. One thing I really like to do, though, is cook. I cook dinner for myself almost every night. In order to do so, I go to the store for fresh ingredients probably every other day. Right on the way home from work, there's a Walmart only about a mile from my apartment, and I found that they usually have the cheapest prices, so I go there for produce and protein all the time. Sometimes I go to other stores, but by far the most common one for me is Walmart. This story takes place just a few months back. Like usual, I was stopping at Walmart after work. I would never get much, just like 4 or 5 ingredients usually, and sometimes whatever else I needed as well. I got off of work anywhere from 3 p.m. to 4, so I get to Walmart shortly after that each day. The store was usually sort of busy. One day, an employee by the produce area said hi to me. I mentioned this because the next time I was shopping, he said hi to me again when I was in the same area. Looking back, I hadn't really noticed him before, but I had never really paid attention to the employees. He was bald, had a small dark beard, and was sort of a big guy. He seemed very friendly, and the second time, he asked me how my day was going. We made very basic conversation for maybe 30 seconds before I told the man I better go and I went on with my shopping. This ended up becoming a regular thing over the next couple of weeks or so. Every time I was shopping, this same Walmart employee would say hi and engage in conversation with me. I didn't mind it too much because he was always really nice, although when I was getting ingredients after work, I was sort of anxious to get home and didn't really want to chit-chat. The man did start to ask slightly more personal questions each time, like if I was coming home from work, where I worked, and where I lived, things like that. They were starting to weird me out a little bit. I wasn't sure if the man was just a really friendly employee or something else. I told myself he was just a nice guy, and like I said, it didn't really bother me. That was until one time I was walking through Walmart doing my usual shopping, and he approached me again. He asked me how my day was, and the usual. Then he asked me for my number. I was nice, but I told the man no. I was afraid he would get the wrong idea if I said yes. Besides, he should know how weird it sounded. I mean, come to think of it, I never really saw the guy doing any real work. He would always just be standing around and then talk to me. The man seemed offended when I said no. I started to try and explain my reasoning to the man, but he just turned and walked away as I started to speak. His whole body language changed. After he walked away, I resumed my shopping. He had gone further into the grocery aisles of the store, but luckily I didn't have to get anything back there. I was inside the Walmart shopping for maybe 10 more minutes before checking out and leaving. I remember that on that day, I parked in the back of the parking lot, and when I got inside my car, I noticed that the Walmart employee was inside a car not too far away from mine. I really have no idea how I noticed him looking back, but I'm glad that I did. I was assuming that he was either on a break or had just gotten off of work for the day. He did not appear to be looking at me, which I was glad to see. I pulled out of my parking space, only to see him pull out and exit the parking lot behind me. I watched in my rearview mirror, and he made the same 2 turns that I did to get back to my apartment. About a minute later, I was arriving at my apartment complex. I was kind of creeped out now because I was almost positive that this man did not live here. I drove around the parking lot of my complex a little and did not want to go straight to my building. I was really suspicious. The man's car trailed mine the entire time. When I realized that he was probably just going to follow me no matter where I went, I decided to leave. I did not know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there. I drove down the quiet road near the complex to a busier one. Then I signaled to merge onto a busier road. At this hour, that road in particular was really busy because it was almost 5 p.m. now and rush hour. With the man right behind me, I waited for a gap in the traffic. After about 30 seconds, there was one, but I waited until the very last moment and then pulled out. I basically cut the car off that was driving down the road, and there were several other cars behind it. The car honked at me, but the man behind me had no opportunity to merge at all. That allowed me to basically get away from the guy. I drove down the road for a very short time before turning. It was then that I had the idea to go back to the Walmart. I was fuming with anger. I drove straight back there and to the customer service counter. When I got there, I told them about how one of their employees had followed me home. This Walmart didn't seem to be the most organized, and they had to call up someone from the produce section to help. When I explained to them what had happened, they told me that nobody of that description works there. I realized that the man must have just put on a blue Walmart vest. Maybe he had worked at a Walmart in the past, or maybe he had just bought the vest online. Either way, he wasn't an employee of this store. I was even more creeped out now. They told me that they would keep an eye out for the man if he returned, which made me feel a very tiny bit better, but not a whole lot. After that, I very carefully drove back to my apartment again. Thankfully, I did not see the man or his car. I don't believe he knew which apartment building was mine either. Since that happened a few months ago, I have not seen the man. I also have not been back to that particular Walmart either. This happened last year. I was shopping at my local Walmart, just doing some typical shopping on a random weeknight. The store was pretty quiet, and it was probably like 8 or 9 p.m. I had been in the store for about 15 minutes or so, and I was in the aisle where they have the fitness items. I was looking at one of those massage guns. I wasn't planning on buying one that day, or even buying one at Walmart, but I had been considering getting one. When I walked by, I noticed it and stopped to read the box. I was in the aisle looking at it for a few minutes, and when I was doing so, I remember hearing some voices in the next aisle over. It happened to be a toy aisle, and this was at sort of the back corner of the store. I heard a man's voice, and then the voice of a child. At first, I paid no attention as I was looking, but soon I heard the man say, "I will buy you this toy if you come with me." I assumed it was the child's father at first, but I didn't really know why he would say that. I couldn't really make out what the kid said back to him, but I heard the man then say something like, "Your mom said it's okay." Then, I just had the crazy thought that maybe this wasn't the child's father. The man started saying, "Come on, let's go," a couple of times. I heard him starting to walk to the end of the aisle. I just had a really bad feeling about it. At the time, I didn't know if I was just being nosy or if I should do something. I decided to walk by the aisle and glance down it to see. I left the aisle that I was in and walked into the next one over, which was a toy aisle. And when I looked down, I saw a man wearing a black jacket and winter hat, holding the hand of a little kid and leading her to the other end of the aisle. Their backs were facing me. I was kind of thinking on the fly, and I said, "Excuse me," to the guy. He turned around and looked really surprised. I picked up some random toy from the shelf. It was some type of stuffed animal. I said I wanted to ask the man a question, if this would be a good gift for my niece. I then started walking over to them. He said he had no idea, and I said I thought he might know. I then asked if that was his daughter. He said no, and he was just watching her for the moment, but then said they really had to get going. Him and the child then walked away. I really wasn't sure if I should believe him or not. Maybe I was making too much of it. I realized it probably was a reasonable explanation, and I turned and started to walk into the opposite direction. I was telling myself that nothing was wrong, and I was just paranoid. But I'm not even kidding. About 30 seconds later, I heard a woman's voice calling out a name. For this story, let's just say the name was Sarah. The woman was calling out Sarah, not really loud, but enough for people in the aisles nearby to hear, including me. I walked towards the voice and found the woman a few aisles down and more towards the center of the store. When I reached her, I asked if Sarah was her daughter. She looked concerned and said yes. I had a terrible feeling, and I said that I might have seen her daughter with a man and I thought they might be leaving. We both started sprinting towards the front of the store. The good thing is that this was probably less than a minute since I had seen the man. When we made it to the front of the store, we saw the man and the child at the self-checkouts area. He was buying one of the toys for her. The girl's mother started shouting, and the man claimed he was just trying to be nice and buy the toy for the girl, but he quickly tried to run away after realizing nobody would believe that. He ran out the door and was able to momentarily get away. I was just happy that the girl was okay and back with her mother. It turned out that the girl had wandered off from her mother to look at toys while her mom was shopping in another area of the store. The mother had believed that her child was nearby, but had actually wandered off much further. I also found out that the guy was located not long after this at all. I remember this Walmart, sort of where I live, that used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure, but I think there were a lot of Walmarts that used to be open 24 hours. All the ones that I've been to in recent years close at like 10 p.m. now, though. Maybe the reason is because of things happening, like the story I'm about to tell you. This was several years ago, probably about 2014. I remember that I worked a job back then with all kinds of crazy hours. I never really knew when I would get off of work, and some nights were really late. One time, I got off of work at close to 3 a.m. By the time I was done, I was exhausted, but also really hungry. On my way home, I stopped at the 24-hour Walmart to see what they had. There were no restaurants nearby that were still open, and I was just going to go down the snack aisle and maybe find something to drink as well. When I got inside, I made my way over to the food. The store was almost completely empty. I only saw a couple of employees here and there. When I got to the snack aisle, I browsed around for a little bit. I wasn't really sure exactly what I was hungry for. I often have a hard time deciding what to eat or where to get food from. I browsed for maybe 5 minutes, and then I had this feeling like I was being watched. It seemed a little strange, and I looked around. When I looked to the far end of the aisle, I saw a man standing there looking towards me. He was a sort of tall and skinny guy, wearing a black Adidas sweatshirt. When he saw me looking at him, he just kept standing there. He wasn't looking at anything on the shelves in particular. He looked away from me, but I thought the guy seemed really weird. I went back to looking at the food on the shelves and tried to make up my mind. I wandered into the next aisle over. There was more food in that aisle. I was there for no more than 10 seconds, and I noticed a man creeping around the corner slowly and then looking at me again from the end of the aisle. This was really strange. I grabbed a bag of trail mix and then made my way towards the back of the store along the side. Once I was at the far back corner of the store, I decided to walk back to one of the main walkways, but when I got there, the man was already standing there looking at me. I started walking all around the store, and the man seemed to be following me. He kept slowly walking around the store, trailing me wherever I went, and it was really frustrating. His face was almost expressionless the entire time, and he never spoke a word. Finally, I said, "Forget this," and I went to the checkout area. There was only one check lane still open, and I told the cashier that some guy had been following me around the store. The man did not follow me into the checkout, but instead wandered off into the clothing area that was across from the check lanes. She just kind of said, "Thanks for letting us know," and agreed that it was weird. I just wanted to get home, eat something, and go to bed. After I was done checking out, I walked down towards the exit doors. I was sure to scan over and make sure that the creepy guy was not once again following me. I was really happy to see that he wasn't. When I made it out the door, I walked through the parking lot to my car. My car was parked a little ways from the doors. It wasn't in the far back end of the parking lot, but it wasn't really that close either. The parking lot was mostly empty, but there were a few cars scattered all around, most of which I'm guessing were employees. Right as I was starting my engine, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man sprinting at full speed from the Walmart headed straight for my car. It was the same guy that had been following me around. The way that he was running was so fast, like he was running for his life, but he wasn't running away from anything. He was running for me. There was a second or two where I was so confused that I just watched him. That was until I realized he was going to reach my car very quickly. Then I put my car into drive and got out of there. I pulled away probably just a couple of seconds before he would have reached me. He kept running though, all the way until I was out of the parking lot and on the street. Then I was easily able to get away. I was really confused who the man was, why he followed me around in the store, and why he had ran full speed at me when I was in my car. The lesson I learned from this was to not go back to Walmart in the middle of the night. I'm a female, and this story took place about 4 years ago. I was at Walmart shopping. Back then, I went there all the time. On this day, I was only getting like 2 or 3 things. It was nighttime. The store was somewhat busy though. I was able to find what I needed pretty easily, and I spent a total of maybe 10 minutes inside the store. At one point though, a man came up seemingly out of nowhere and introduced himself to me. He was about 5'8" and had grayish hair. He asked me my name and what I was shopping for. I saw that he didn't work there, and he came across to me as a little strange. I spoke with the man for maybe a minute, but I told him that I had to leave. He was sort of creeping me out. When I walked away, I headed straight for the checkouts, and when I got there, I saw that there was only 2 other people in the self-checkout area that had maybe 6 registers. I went to one and began scanning my items. That's when I saw the man again. It looked as though he had followed me all the way from the aisle we were in together, and that aisle was on the whole other end of the store. When he got to the self-checkouts, he did not go to an open one. Instead, he walked straight up to me. Then, he offered to pay for my items that I was getting. I told the man no thanks, and I asked him why he wanted to do that. He said he was just trying to be nice, and I said thanks, but I would buy it for myself. Then the man walked away. But he wasn't buying anything at all. He just seemed to walk out and leave the store. I finished checking out and then walked away to leave. When I got outside, the first thing I saw was the man standing there. He said hi to me once again. It scared me, but I said hi. The man asked if I wanted to come over to his house. It was really awkward. I told him sorry but no, and I started walking away. At first, the man took a couple of steps towards me and was walking with me, but after about 5 seconds or so, he stopped. He did not continue to follow me, and I got to my car and drove home. This experience was creepy, and should have been enough for me to not go back to that Walmart, but I thought it wasn't that big of a deal. So this guy was a bit of a creep. So what? I continued to go back to that Walmart. I went there several more times with no problems. Probably about a month after this had happened though, I was shopping at the same Walmart once again. I was doing some typical grocery shopping, and it was like 8 p.m. I was in one of the first food aisles of the store, and I noticed the man was there again. When I first saw him, I recognized him, but I'd actually forgotten about what had happened. I didn't know where I had seen him before at first, and it took my brain about 5 seconds to remember. When I did, I knew I needed to get out of there. As I was starting to walk away, I saw him look up and notice me. I left the aisle and walked as far away from him as I could to the complete other end of the store. I still had a couple of more things to get in the grocery department, but I wanted to wait until the man was gone. Running into him again was something I needed to avoid doing. In the meantime, I started just looking around at random items on the side of the store that I was now on. There were far less shoppers over there, and it was quiet. I slowly walked down a few aisles, just kind of taking my time. As I was doing so, I noticed the man again. He seemed to be heading in my direction, but was still really far away. I knew that I had to get out of there. I started walking away as fast as I could, and I went down different aisles to block myself from the man's view. I just set my basket with several items in it on the ground and then left the store. There was no way I would have been able to check out without the man catching up to me. Once I left the store, I drove back home. After that, I did not return to that particular Walmart for some time. I believe that it was a total coincidence that I saw the man again there that night, but when he saw me, he was going to try to talk to me again for sure. He must shop there a lot, and I'm just glad that since then, I have never seen the guy. I used to work at a Walmart a couple of years ago. This was my strangest experience. I mostly worked overnights and would stock shelves. It was an easy job for me. I would start at like 9 p.m., and at first the store would actually be open, but would close only like 2 hours into my shift. There would never be very many customers in that time anyways. A good number of us worked overnights because obviously Walmart is a really big store. On this one night, I happened to be working in the pets and supplies aisle, which is in the back end of the store. I had been working in that general area, but not that exact aisle earlier in the night, but by now it was about 11:30 p.m. Our store closed at 11, so we had been closed for 30 minutes now. As I was in the pet supply aisle, I was just stocking one of the shelves by myself. When the store closed, I would often put in headphones and listen to music while I worked, which is what I was doing. It helped work go by faster and easier for me. But out of nowhere, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It appeared as though somebody had walked by. I looked over, but they were now gone. I assumed it to be one of my coworkers, and once a few minutes went by, I kept working. Then, again, I saw somebody at the end of the aisle out of the corner of my eye. I looked over, and this time the person did not walk away. It wasn't one of my coworkers, though. It looked like just some guy that I had never seen before. When I looked at him, he disappeared behind the next aisle. I got up and walked over and then looked down the next aisle. When I did, I saw the man disappearing out of that aisle and into the one after that. I took out my headphones and then radioed in on my walkie that I thought I saw somebody inside the store who wasn't supposed to be here. After that, I kept doing my work. About an hour later, I went to the back room. That area was pretty large in our store, but I was the only one back in that section at the time. When I was walking over there, I was sure that I saw the man again. I could see him hiding behind a box underneath one of the shelves there. I didn't stare at him, and I acted like I never saw him. I was going to walk past, but I decided to turn around and then go the other way instead. He was maybe 30 feet away. When I began walking back, I heard noises behind me, even with my headphones in. I started running for the exit to go back into the sales floor. I heard footsteps behind me when I did. When I got there, I opened the door and the man did not come out after me. I ran to find the nearest employee. That was Al, who was working in the electronics overnight at the time. I told him that I saw a man in the back, and he decided to come back and see. I had a bad feeling, and I wondered if the guy was dangerous. We both went back there anyways. When we opened the door to the back, we heard the sound of another door opening. It was coming from one of the doors we had back there that opened up to the outside. They were rarely used. We walked in further, just in time to see the guy walking out of the store and the door closing behind him. After that, he was gone. I still don't know how the man got inside. My only guess is he somehow avoided all employees and hid inside the store until after we had closed. I also wonder what he was going to do to me when he was hiding in the back and then followed me. Luckily, I quit that job not too long afterwards. My coworker, who was also my best friend, had just bought a new gaming PC and kept talking about it all week. I couldn't afford anything like that, so he offered to lend me his old setup. He said I could come by and grab it whenever since I had a key to his place. It was a little after 11 p.m. one night when I walked over to his apartment to grab it. That night my friend was still working for one more hour. He lived in the next building over, maybe a 3-minute walk. When I got to his place, the door was unlocked already. He did have a bit of a bad habit of not locking the door when he left, so I assumed he had done that yet again. I went into the living room where his gaming computer was set up so I could grab the old PC. When I entered the living room, I saw an older man was sitting in the recliner just reading a book. He looked strange, but he didn't look like a drifter. No one else had a key to my friend's place, so I knew right away this guy didn't belong. His eyes had this crazy look that I will never forget, like they were detached from reality. He turned to look at me, and I felt my blood go cold. He just smiled at me and closed the book. He stared at me like that for a few seconds before standing up and opening his arms out like he wanted a hug. I totally forgot about the PC, and I just sprinted out the door back towards my apartment after he started coming towards me for a hug. When I got back to my place, I called 911, and I stayed on the line with the dispatcher as they told me to lock myself in my room. Not long after, I heard a knock on my door for a few seconds before nothing. My bed is in the middle of my room, and the head of my bed is right underneath a window on ground level. I stupidly sat up against the window, wanting to see my whole room. I had my pocket knife with me, and I was holding it tightly in my hands as I sat in panicked silence. Suddenly, directly behind me, I heard a loud crashing noise as the crazy man broke my window from my backyard. I felt his arm then wrap around my neck as he started dragging me through my broken window, the shards of glass cutting into my skin. I slashed and stabbed my knife behind me blindly, and I heard the man curse in pain as his grip loosened. I stabbed his arm a couple times before wriggling myself from his grasp. Thankfully, the police arrived quickly, and they managed to get there as he was still dealing with the pain from the stab wounds in his arm, and the police managed to tackle him as he tried to run. The man was cuffed and placed in a patrol car, and I was taken to the hospital for the injuries I sustained from the glass on my window. The man didn't talk much at all before going to jail, and he said nothing useful. Neither me nor my best friend knew the man, but we assumed that he was there waiting for my friend to come home, and had his plan screwed up by me going to get the gaming computer. It was late 2021 when I moved into a small rental on the edge of town after changing jobs. I was a guy living on my own, and the place belonged to a coworker's uncle who had moved into an assisted living place, so the house had been sitting empty for a while. The rent was cheap, and it was only about a 30-minute drive to work, so I didn't ask too many questions. I just agreed to keep the place in decent shape and cover utilities. The house itself was nothing special. 2 floors, 2 bedrooms, a small yard, and a detached garage that I didn't really use. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older people, and there was not much traffic at night. About a week in, I noticed the side gate to the back door was open when I got home from work. I was pretty sure I had latched it that morning because I usually double-check things like that. I walked around the yard thinking maybe the wind pushed it open, even though it was one of those heavier wooden gates. Nothing else seemed off, so I closed it and didn't think too much about it. A few days later, I found it open again. This time, I was sure I had shut it properly before leaving. I checked around the yard more carefully, but didn't see anything missing or out of place. I figured maybe the latch was loose or broken, so I tied it shut with a bit of wire I found in the garage. The next morning, the wire I had used on the gate was untwisted and loose, and the gate was open again. I started thinking maybe someone was cutting through the yard for some reason and didn't know that the house was being lived in. It didn't make much sense though, since there was nothing behind the house except for another fenced property. I retied the gate, this time tighter, and left for work. That evening, I decided to check the garage since I hadn't really gone in there much. When I opened it, I noticed a couple of things had been moved around. There was an old chair that had been against the wall and was now closer to the door, and a small box of cardboard I remembered seeing in the corner was open. I started to think that there was a squatter who had been living on the property or in the garage while the place had been unattended. Maybe they didn't know I was living there now, or maybe they just didn't care. I called the owner and asked him if anybody else had access to the place. He said no, it was just me. That night, I was watching a show at 1 a.m. when I was surprised to hear the chattering of voices nearby. I listened intently, but couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the 2 people approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that these people wanted to break in. I leaned against the front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob to be shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or changed their minds. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you can move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains then and was taken aback to see that leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was, and he tightened his hoodie over his face so all I could really see were his eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them frozen in fear, trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over my window, locked them, and then ran upstairs to the storage room where I then pushed the table up against the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows shaken aggressively. When they realized they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream, but by the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't taking any more chances, and shortly after, I moved out. What irritates me is this whole time I thought I was dealing with squatters, but I'm not so sure about that anymore, because after they saw me was when they got angry and tried to break in. This is one of my only scary experiences. It happened when I was 13 or 14. I was on vacation in England with my parents, my uncle, and his then girlfriend. We rented an Airbnb in Oxford for 3 nights, and it was on the first day. We just got there, and the adults went out to buy groceries. I was tired from the trip, so I decided to stay in the apartment. It had 6 rooms with a hallway, a bathroom, a kitchen, the living room, and 2 bedrooms on the sides. My room had 2 beds, one next to the door, and the other on the other side of the room under the window and next to the radiator. So anyways, I was now alone in the flat, and I started watching horror stories ironically. I was listening with the headphones on, but they were low quality so I could kind of hear through them. So eventually, about 10 to 20 minutes after my parents left, I started to hear voices. I paused the video and the voices stopped. 30 seconds later, the video was back on, and I heard voices again. So this time, I took my headphones off. I could still hear the voices. I assumed it might have been people from another flat on the same floor, but at one point they started to knock on the door and call out hello. I was alone, I was 14 years old, and I had just watched 2 compilations of horror stories in a row. There was no way I was going to answer the door, even if it was my door being knocked on. I put the video back on, but I was uneasy, so I wasn't really listening. Instead, I was focusing on the voices. Not a minute later, I heard the front door open. It couldn't be my parents. We're not native English speakers, and that accent was too good to be theirs. Even if they were playing a prank on me, it was not their voices. So I did what any reasonable paranoid 14-year-old would have done in this scenario. I grabbed my stuff that was on the bed, my phone and my daggers, since I had one that I would always take with me on trips. I hid behind the bed, in a small little area between the mattress and the wall near the radiator. Then I called my dad in tears, panicked, and whisper shouting so that he would hear me, but the intruder wouldn't know that there was someone in the apartment. Meanwhile, the intruder was opening every door and checking every room for some reason. My dad said he would be back in maybe 10 minutes, and he told me to stay hidden and quiet. Eventually, he hung up, but not 2 minutes after that, the person opened the door to my room, and I prayed that he would not walk straight towards me. And of course, with my legendary luck, he walked straight towards me. So I closed my eyes, breathed in, clutched my knife and phone, and got up, shaking. If I had to go down, I would go down fighting. When I faced him, I could just see the surprise on his face. He almost jumped when he saw me. I asked with a heavy French accent, "Who are you?" He had the audacity to answer that he was the owner of the apartment. I wasn't actually mad, I was just relieved that he was not someone trying to harm me. My dad got there like 1 minute later, during which the guy and I were still standing there, side-eyeing each other in awkward silence. I cried a lot while the guy almost cried and apologized over and over again. It turns out when we arrived, the boiler had died, and my parents called him to warn him, but managed to fix it after a while. The guy then came without warning them because he wanted to check the radiators. That's why he came straight towards me when he walked into the room I was in, because I was hiding right next to the radiator. But all is well that ends well, and now it's a funny story. This happened around late fall 2018. My parents had started traveling more for work, and every now and then I would stay at home alone in the house for about a week to watch over things. It was a quiet area, not rural, but not busy either. There were long stretches of road with only a few houses, and behind ours was a patch of trees that turned into a forest. I wasn't exactly fearless at my age. A year before, I had someone follow me while I was out running, and it stuck with me. Still, being at home usually felt fine. We had 2 large hunting dogs, and most of the neighbors kept to themselves, but looked out for anything unusual in the neighborhood. A few days before my parents left that time, someone mentioned a car being broken into a couple of streets over. It was enough to make me double-check the locks at night. My parents brushed it off, said stuff like that happens everywhere, and reminded me that we had security lights and dogs. On the 4th day of being home alone, I had to run out to grab some groceries. I went later than I should have, just before it got fully dark. The store wasn't far, so I walked, and I took the usual way back, cutting through a side street that connected to my neighborhood. On the way back, I noticed a man sitting on a bench. I didn't think much of it until I passed him and then heard footsteps behind me. At first, I assumed that he was just heading in the same direction as me. I just kept walking, trying to act normal, but I could feel him still following me. When I reached the corner near my house, I saw one of my neighbors outside taking out the trash. I walked straight towards him and said something random just to start a conversation. The footsteps behind me stopped. I glanced back quickly, and the man had already turned around, walking away fast. I told my parents later, and like usual, they told me I would be fine with the security lights and dogs. That night, I stayed downstairs with the dogs. Around midnight, everything was quiet. The dogs were lying near the couch, half asleep. I was on my phone when I heard something outside, a soft tap against the back window. A few minutes passed. Then there was another tap, this time from the side of the house. Someone was going around the house to each window, tapping on it or checking if it was unlocked. I turned off the lights without thinking and just stood there, listening to the next taps. Another knock, louder this time, on the front door. I could see the door from where I stood. A shadow close enough that it blocked the streetlight was right in front of the door. The door handle shook slightly, like someone tested it. I went back into the hallway, trying not to make a noise. My phone was already in my hand. I thought about calling the police, but I called my parents instead. There was a sudden bang against the door, hard enough to make the frame creak. The dogs started barking then, loud and sharp, but they stayed close to me instead of running up to the door. Another bang on the door, and then another. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. I ducked into the small laundry room and shut the door, locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. My mom picked up after a few rings finally. They could hear the banging through the line, and I told them while starting to cry that someone was trying to break into the house. The banging kept going the whole time I was on the phone, and at one point it sounded like someone hit the window next to the door. My mom told me to stay where I was and not to come out no matter what. My dad was already calling every neighbor who lived nearby, as the police would take too long to get there. After what felt like forever, I heard a car pull up outside, and then voices shouting at the man who was trying to get through the front door and window next to it. A minute later, there was a knock on the laundry room door. It was my neighbor who had a key to our house. When I came out, the front door had a dent near the handle, and the window beside it was cracked. My neighbors said they saw someone run into the backyard when they pulled up, heading towards the trees behind the house. They didn't bother to chase him in fear of being ambushed by him in the darkness back by the woods. We walked around outside later with flashlights once more neighbors arrived, and we had a big group, but there was nothing else to see. Just footprints in the garden near the back fence which the intruder must have climbed over to escape into the woods. My parents didn't let me stay alone in the house after that, and always had a plan for me to have some other adult staying with me. This story happened to my mother when she was in her mid-20s, sometime around 1979 or so, just a few years before she married my dad. She was living with a friend in an apartment on a shady street in Jackson, Mississippi. Her roommate was a musician, but she was out of town for the weekend and not expected to be back until the next day on Monday. On Sunday night, my mom went to bed, and she heard some rattling in the front room. She then heard the front door open. She thought that her roommate was back. However, as seconds went by, she wondered why her roommate didn't turn on the light and why she didn't say, "I'm back." Then, as she heard things moving around in the front room, she realized that she was in desperate trouble. There was one room between her and where the burglar was. There was a back door behind my mom near the kitchen, but it's always kept locked, and she didn't have a key. Being a religious person, she began to pray. Her mind became clear, and she thought the best thing to do would be to remain still and quiet. Maybe after he got the money out of her purse, he would leave. Still praying, my mom snuggled down into the pillow, but she was so frightened that she was shaking all over. She opened one eye to see the figure of a tall, dark man coming through the doorway. He was quite tall. She knew that he had to be over 6'4", because her fiancé was that height, and this guy was taller than that when he came through the door. As he walked towards her in the room, she still thought that she would try to remain still and quiet and pretend to be asleep. He stood at the foot of her bed and looked down at her, tilting his head from side to side as if trying to see her face. She decided that this could possibly be her last few minutes on earth. She cried out to God and said, "Father, Father, Father," and screamed as loudly as she could. When she stopped screaming, she realized that the huge man had walked back out through the front room and out the front door, closing the door behind him. My mom locked the door, turned on the lights, and realized that it was not a dream. Later, she called the police and made a report on the incident. It turns out the guy who broke in got less than $10 from her purse. They asked her to identify him through small pictures which showed only faces. Not having seen his face very clearly, she could not identify him, as they all seemed very much alike. She finally chose one of them. The detective had been a teaching assistant at the University of Southern Mississippi where my mom took classes, so she knew him. He looked rather disappointed at the picture she chose and said, "I wish you should have chose the man right there," pointing at another man. He's 6'6" and was just paroled last week. He lives 2 streets down. How could she have identified him if he was not shown to her lineup, but only a small picture of his face? Nothing more came from the incident or the police report. The next week, my mom read about a similar incident several blocks away. However, the woman did not survive, and they found her body on the lawn the next day. My mom stayed with another friend for several weeks. Even though her roommate was back, she didn't feel safe there for the time being. Some friends were critical of how she handled the incident, some saying, "I don't think I would have screamed," and other stuff like that. One friend said, "Don't you see what happened when you called out 'Father, Father'? He thought there was someone else there in the house with you, causing him to leave in a hurry." That's the story of how our Heavenly Father protected my mom that night over 40 years ago.
In my early childhood, I would spend nearly every day riding my bike. It was a normal summer afternoon when I went out with my friend once when I was 8 years old. We pedaled around the neighborhood, racing each other and stopping for snacks. After a couple of hours, my friend had to go home. I still had some time, so I decided to ride on my own. I took a route that went through a quiet area where the trees lined the streets and the houses were spaced apart. It felt peaceful at first, but soon I noticed a white Volkswagen not far behind me. I didn't think much of it initially. Cars passed by all the time, and I figured it was just another driver out for a leisurely afternoon. But as I continued, I realized that the car was following me. I took a left turn, then a right, trying to shake it off, but the Volkswagen stayed close. I remembered what my dad had taught me about safety and what to do if I felt threatened. I pushed my bike harder, trying to distance myself from the car. Then it stopped beside me. A man stepped out. He was hairy with a scruffy beard and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. He smelled really bad, but I remembered that I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't cover my nose. He stood a bit away from me on the curb and crouched down to my level height and asked if I was okay. I nodded, saying I was fine and just biking, keeping my eyes on him, trying to gauge his intentions. The man went on to say that he was a friend of my parents, and they had told him to find me and drive me to my grandma's house. My grandma had been dead for 5 years now, and I knew that he wasn't who he said he was. I'm not sure if I would have believed him anyways at that age, because I didn't think my parents could possibly be friends with someone who smelled that bad. I called him a liar and then started pedaling again as hard as I could. As I started leaving, the man reached out to try to grab my arm, but I had already put enough distance from him to avoid his grasp. I rode straight home, not checking to see if the car was following me still or not. The only thing I could think about was the man and what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. When I finally burst through the front door, my parents were in the living room. I was shaking and crying as I told them everything. My parents called the police, describing the type of car that I had described. Miraculously, on their way to my house, they passed the white car that had been following me and arrested the smelly guy who was driving. Then they arrived at my house, and after my verification that that was the guy that tried to grab me, the police left with the man. I had no idea what ended up happening to him and what his consequence was. I think my parents knew, but since I was pretty young, they told me to not worry about it and that I would be safe. It was scary when it happened, but looking back, it felt good that the guy had ended up being caught. One summer evening when I was about 9 or 10, a serious accident happened just a couple of blocks from our farmhouse. We weren't home when it occurred, but had heard about it from our neighbors. The next day, curiosity got the best of me, so I asked my mom if I could ride my bike up to the corner where the accident took place. I wanted to check out the area to see if I could see anything that had been left over, and I was also just bored. My mom said yes, but warned me not to go any further. She was hanging laundry on the clothesline outside and kept an eye on me as I pedaled away. Our area was rural and quiet. My brother and I rode our bikes everywhere and always felt safe. When I got to the corner, I hopped off my bike and began to look around at the scattered debris. There were bits of broken glass and a crumpled piece of metal. I didn't know much about cars, but it was fun to look at for some reason. As I poked through the leftover wreckage, I heard a car approaching. It was a dark blue station wagon. The two men inside looked older, maybe in their 40s. I felt uneasy immediately, and then they rolled down the window and called out to me. They asked me which one of them was cuter. I jumped back on my bike, pedaling as fast as I could back to my house, which was less than half a mile away. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them turning the car around to follow me. As I biked down the road, I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping my mom would hear. Thankfully, she had heard me and was running toward me, her face a mix of confusion and concern. The station wagon was close behind still, but as we neared our driveway, the men hesitated. They must have seen my mom coming closer, because they slammed on the brakes and turned their car back down the gravel road, heading away from us. I didn't stop pedaling until I reached my mom. When I explained, she was understandably shaken. She called the police, who came to get information, but there wasn't much they could do. I told them what I remembered about the car and the men's faces, but there wasn't too much to go off of, so I don't think they ever found them. It was scary that something so dangerous could happen so close to my house, where I had always felt very safe. I live in a busy city and would often ride my bike to get places so that I wouldn't have to deal with traffic, and I just enjoy biking. I had a heavy single-speed bike that was perfect for short trips, but would always be a workout when going up hills. One evening, I decided to ride to the grocery store. My route took me through a park, one that I had biked through before and knew well. As I pedaled along the dirt path that ran around the perimeter of the park, I found myself struggling up a hill. The weight of the bike felt particularly burdensome, and I could hear the sound of someone jogging behind me. The rhythmic thud of feet hitting the ground was unmistakable, and it grew louder as they gained on me. Feeling embarrassed by my slow pace, I decided to let the jogger pass. I veered to the right, expecting them to zip by, but they didn't. I kept pedaling, trying to speed up, but the sound of their footsteps stayed right behind me. I didn't want to risk looking behind me while biking up the hill, in fear of hitting a rut or rock in the dirt path. I even slowed down a ton, just waiting for them to pass, but they never did. Finally, I pulled off the path and into the grass, ready to turn around and give whoever it was a piece of my mind. But when I turned, I was met with nothing but empty trail. No jogger and no more footsteps, just silence. I looked around, scanning the park for any sign of movement, but there was none. The jogger had vanished. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I was baffled because I was certain I had heard someone right behind me. After a few minutes of standing there, I finally hopped back on my bike and continued to the grocery store. That night, back at home, I started to look up more about the park that I was biking through. Apparently, the park had been built over a cemetery, primarily for the poor. They had moved some bodies, but not all. Estimates suggested there were still around 2,000 remains buried underneath the park. I even found stories from people who claimed to have seen apparitions or felt cold spots while walking through the park at night. It seemed to make sense now that if the park was haunted, that it had something to do with my experience while biking through it earlier that day. I still bike through that park fairly often, but haven't had anything strange happen to me again, although I try to avoid it at night. When I was younger, I would go on many cycling trips. The year after I graduated college, I embarked on a long-distance cycling trip across Australia. I'd cycled through many places and had some strange experiences, but one night stands out in my memory from when I was in Australia. I had been riding for weeks in Western and Southern Australia. Most of my journey was uneventful, filled with the sounds of nature and the rhythm of my bike tires against the dirt roads. On this particular evening, I found myself cycling alongside a pipeline that hugged the highway. As dusk approached, I decided to find a quiet spot to camp. I veered off the dirt road, moving inland. The deeper I went, the more I felt I was leaving civilization behind. I stumbled upon what looked like a small forest, with overgrown ruins peeking through the trees. Stone walls were jutted out from the ground, remnants of houses that had been there long ago. It felt eerie, but also interesting, as if nature had taken the land back from the past. I decided this was a nice spot, so I stopped and set up my tent, ensuring that the area was clear of brush and debris. After a simple pasta dinner, I snuffed out the fire and crawled into my tent. By then, it was around 8 p.m., and darkness had enveloped the forest quickly. I had grown accustomed to camping alone, and nights spent outdoors were nothing new to me. But that night was different. The first thing I noticed was an unsettling silence. Normally, the forest is full of sounds, whether they're comforting or intimidating, but it was dead silent. I lay in my sleeping bag, straining to hear any sound such as crickets, animals, or anything, but there was nothing. Eventually, I heard loud and deliberate footsteps though. I speculated that it was a person. I couldn't think of an animal that made such a distinct walking sound that I knew of. I held my breath, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice my presence. The intervals between the steps were oddly spaced, like someone was taking their time. I debated between grabbing my torch and confronting whatever was out there, or just sitting in silence. Moments dragged on, filled only by those ominous steps circling my tent. The footsteps continued for most of the night, sometimes fading into the distance, only to circle back. I must have sat there for what felt like hours, gripping my shovel tightly in case I needed to use it. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the sun was peeking through the trees, casting light into the tent. Outside, the forest was alive now with sounds I had missed earlier that night, such as birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. I quickly scanned the area for any signs of what happened during the night, but there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no indication that something had circled my tent. It was as if the forest had returned to its natural state, erasing any evidence of the previous night's terror. I hurriedly packed up my gear, shaken but relieved to be moving again. As I cycled back towards the pipeline and the highway, I couldn't shake off the strange feeling of whatever had happened the night before, certain that it wasn't just my imagination. I love riding my bike at night, and would often go for night rides on this trail near my house. I had been on this trail many times, and never saw anything strange until this one night. As I was riding, the beam from my bike light sliced through the shadows, illuminating the narrow path ahead. I was biking fast, and as I rounded a bend, something caught my eye. Off to the right of the path, just beyond the tree line, stood a figure. Since I was going pretty fast, it was only visible in my headlight for a split second, but it was a person, their outline barely visible in the darkness. They seemed to just be standing there, motionless. I flew by and questioned if my eyes were playing tricks on me, and if I had really seen someone just standing there in the woods. I was a little bit nervous because the trail I was on was just one big loop, with the entrance and exit being the same path. So on my way back out, I would pass by that spot again. As I finished the loop and got back onto the path where I had seen the figure, I was nervous about seeing it again. I didn't even want to see it, and I kept my eyes on the path right in front of me, not daring to look out into the woods when I approached the spot. But I couldn't avoid seeing it this time. In the middle of the trail stood the same figure. This time I could make out a bit more detail. It looked like a man, though it was hard to tell in the dark. He stood there, legs apart, blocking my path. I slowed down, unsure of what to do, but this was the only way out. I had to pass him. I yelled at him to get out of my way, but there was no response. I pushed down on the pedals, hoping to dart past him somehow, but as I got closer, he suddenly lunged towards me. My heart sank as I realized he was trying to push me off my bike. I swerved to the left, almost hitting the trees on the left side of the path. As he tried to grab me or knock me off, I kicked my right leg into him, trying to kick him and push him back away from my bike. I don't know if it was his shoulder or arm, but part of his body made contact with my upper body as he tried to shove me off the trail and off my bike. I'm not even sure how, maybe just crazy adrenaline, but I had managed to stay upright on my bike through all this and not hit the trees on my left as I squeezed past him. I pedaled hard, pumping my legs as fast as I could all the way back home. That night, I warned the authorities about the guy on the path and hoped that maybe he would still be there when they arrived, but I doubted it. I'm not sure if he was trying to mug me or maybe he wanted to steal my bike, but either way, he was crazy enough to try to attack me on foot while I was biking. I still bike that trail all the time, but I always have a firearm with me now just in case.
This happened late last summer. My husband and I decided to take our kids out to a small campground we've used a few times before. It's pretty spread out, maybe a few hundred yards between sites, and not many people go there during the week. Our son is 7 and our daughter is 3, and this was their first overnight trip. We set up the tent, made food, and let the kids run around. But once it got dark, they got uneasy and every little noise bothered them. After a while, they both started wanting to go home. It got to the point where we figured it just wasn't worth it, so we packed them into the car and dropped them off at my sister's place about 20 minutes away. We told ourselves that we would stay the night and we would head back for the kids in the morning. When we got back to the campsite, we sat by the fire for a bit and then went into the tent at around 11 p.m. We laid down and fell asleep rather quickly, and in around an hour or two later, I woke up and had to pee. I woke my husband up, and he got up and walked me to the bathroom, which was about halfway between campsites. On our way back, we saw a light coming from our campsite, which kind of worried us, making us think that our family was looking for us maybe. We walked quickly back towards the campsite, but right before we got to the trees, my husband threw his arm out to stop me. I stayed quiet and looked back at the campsite and watched the light, and that's when I saw the glint of silver in their hand. The person near our campsite had a long knife in their hands. We ducked down and hid behind some trees in a typical scary movie fashion. The guy heard us then move and then shined his light towards the woods. He started running towards the woods, and we took off running in the opposite direction. We could hear him running behind us, and we kept checking back to see if the light was gone. We eventually were able to circle to the road and crept slowly back to my husband's SUV. We got back and then drove as fast as we could and called the police, who had us take them back to the campsite. We waited in the car while they checked the campsite and the surrounding area. Soon we saw more police cars pull up, and then the 2 original officers came up and asked us to walk to the tent with them. We did, and what we saw was shocking. Our tent was slashed to pieces, and so was all of our stuff. The police ended up evacuating all the other campers and swept the entire area and didn't find anything except a flashlight that was along the way we ran. We got very lucky that we went to the bathroom when we did, and even more lucky that the kids weren't still there with us. When I was about 14, I used to spend weekends at a friend's place outside of a small town in western Pennsylvania. His family had some land, mostly fields and a stretch of woods that ran along an old dirt road no one really used anymore. We'd ride his dad's old ATV around and mess around back there for hours. One winter I stayed over and we got a few inches of snow overnight. The next morning we took the ATV out and rode along the edge of the woods until we got bored. Then we parked it and walked in like we always did. That section of the forest had a lot of junk scattered around. Old farm equipment, tires, and just tons of debris. That day we decided to try building a small shelter with some branches and scrap wood we found. I had a small folding saw with me, so I wandered off a bit to find some branches that weren't frozen solid. I didn't go far, maybe a minute or two away, when I noticed something on the ground. It was a deer, or what was left of one, just mostly bones, but not clean. It looked like it had been pulled apart more than eaten. The ribs were split open in a way I hadn't seen before. I grew up hunting, so dead animals were not new to me, but something about it just didn't seem right. There weren't many tracks around either, which was strange with the snow. I went back and got my friend. He came over and looked at it for a few seconds, and just said maybe coyotes got it. We stood there a bit longer than we should have, then we went back to what we were doing. A little while later, I was tying a branch to one of the supports when I noticed something between the trees. It looked like a person standing still, but I couldn't make out any details. I called out, thinking maybe somebody else was out there. The shape shifted and moved behind a tree too fast to follow. I told my friend, and he didn't really believe me. While he was talking, I looked past him and saw the same thing again, closer to us this time. It was standing out in the open, but still hard to focus on, like my eyes wouldn't settle on it. I grabbed his arm and told him that we needed to go. He laughed at first, but then he turned and saw it too. He didn't say anything after that, and we both just ran. We didn't stick together. I went straight for the field, crashing through branches, not really watching where I was going. When I got out to the open field, I finally stopped and turned around. My friend came out of the trees a little ways down, bent over trying to catch his breath. I asked him if he saw it, and he just nodded. We got on the ATV and went straight back to his house. His parents didn't take us seriously and said that we probably scared ourselves. Later in the day, we walked over to his neighbor's place, an older guy who lived there his whole life. We asked him if anything had ever happened in those woods. He told us that back in the day, there used to be a small logging operation back there many decades ago. He said there was an accident, something about a machine failing resulting in an explosion. A few people died and the place was shut down. Everything dangerous was cleaned up, but not nearly all of it, which explained the equipment and debris that was back there. We told him what we saw, even though it was hard to describe. He just said people used to report seeing things out there, especially in winter. We never went back. The ATV trails we used are probably grown over by now. I don't know what we saw that day, and I don't care to go back and find out. We went camping at a state park that was a couple of hours trip from home one weekend. It was me, my parents, my uncle, and my younger cousin. By the time we turned in for the night, it was close to midnight, and I was ready for bed. Sometime later that night, I woke up needing to pee. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the woods a little bit to pee in some privacy. As I was doing so, I heard a dull tapping sound farther out into the woods. I turned my flashlight on and pointed it in the direction of the sound, but the beam didn't reach very far. I don't know why, but I moved closer to it. I should have just gone back to the tent. But I was curious as to what the sound was, because I knew there were no other campsites that way. Instead, I stepped between the trees and moved closer to the noise. After walking for a few minutes, the noise was getting louder. Eventually, I got closer, and my flashlight revealed a man standing near a tree. He had obviously seen my flashlight and was now looking towards me. I didn't have much time to take in the scene before a man started to move in my direction, but I could see it clear enough, and it was disgusting. With the back of an axe, since that's what he had in his hand, he had hammered dismembered body parts to different trees around him. That explained the tapping sound I had heard, either his axe or a hammer hitting the back of a nail. I ran and didn't think about what direction I went. I just ran. Branches hit my arms and face, and I heard him following behind me at first, but not long after that I stopped hearing him, but I still kept going, trying to run as fast as I could to get away. I had totally lost myself in the woods, and I spent the rest of the night moving in circles. Eventually, after the sun had come up, I heard my family faintly in the distance yelling for me. I was able to meet up with them after walking towards them for a while. My family already had a ranger or police officer with them. I don't remember which one because I was so exhausted. The ranger or officer searched the woods for a while after we had left supposedly, but never found any dismembered body parts in the woods. That night in the woods single-handedly made me one of the least curious people in the world now. I learned to just let things be and not investigate anything. I was about 11 when this happened. My parents left me and my younger brother at my uncle's place for a weekend while they were out of town. His house sat at the edge of a long stretch of forest with a wide open clearing behind it, which was close to a local park. There weren't any neighbors really that close, as they lived about 1,000 feet away. I liked going there because my cousin Matt lived with my uncle. He was older, 19 years old, and treated me like I wasn't just a kid. We'd mess around outside, ride ATVs, shoot airsoft guns, and sometimes just sit in the garage listening to music. That night, my uncle left at around 8 p.m. for a night shift at work. By 11 p.m., my brother was asleep in the spare room, and Matt had knocked out on the couch with the TV still on. I couldn't sleep, however, as I had too much soda and junk food. After a while, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and slipped out the back door, thinking I'd go out into the clearing in the forest and shoot my airsoft gun. There was a path behind the yard that cut through the trees and eventually opened into the clearing in the woods near the park. We'd walked it a bunch of times during the day, but at night it felt longer. When I reached the clearing, I began picking up some of the leftover cans we'd used before and propped them up on some plastic buckets that we had set up. The park was closed in the winter, so we didn't have to worry about leaving stuff out. I began shooting at my targets for about 15 minutes. As I was reloading more pellets into the chamber of my gun, I heard frozen debris crunching on my right. I immediately stopped what I was doing and looked over. The sound was coming from somewhere on the bike path. I should have just turned around and went back to the house immediately at this point. However, my 11-year-old mind was always curious and adventurous, so I decided to investigate. Plus, I had my airsoft gun, so I felt invincible. I advanced down the path a few dozen feet, looking around to see what was making the noise. As I was shining my flashlight around some bushes, I heard somebody humming rather quietly. It was at that point that all the courage from me started to drain, and common sense began to kick in. I was about to consider turning around and running when I heard footsteps coming my way through the woods. I pointed my flashlight into the direction of where the footsteps were coming from. Based on all the details I still remember, the figure was that of a tall, thin, seemingly middle-aged female. Her apparel was just odd, completely opposite of what a normal woman would be wearing in winter weather. She was wearing a long-sleeved black satin dress that draped just past her knees and black high-heeled shoes. Keep in mind it was almost 10 below freezing that night. Once she saw me, she stood still, with her eyes locked on mine. One thing I do remember clearly was the expression on that woman's face. She had the look of satisfaction and malice. It was a very unsettling sight. Not knowing what to do or think of at the moment, I cleared my throat and tried to speak to her. I said hello, and about 10 seconds later, the woman started to make these weird wet sucking noises with her mouth. It sounded like she was chewing on something messily or puckering up her lips to kiss somebody. She then followed with this big toothy smile, laughing under her breath as her eyes continued to focus on me. It began to strike me that this woman who might be on drugs could potentially be dangerous. I took a few steps back as I was very nervous. The woman raised her right arm up from her side and began beckoning me over to her with her index finger, followed by 2 words which were, "Come here." I screamed, dropped my airsoft gun, spun around, and began to run back into the clearing, and then through the path in the woods back towards my uncle's house. While I was still running, I looked over my shoulder, and to my horror, I saw the woman was chasing after me. I could not believe this woman could run so fast despite the high heels she had on, especially through the woods on an uneven path. I was about 30 feet away from exiting the woods back to my uncle's lawn when I took another brief glance over my shoulder again. She was really close to me now, and I knew that she was going to catch me before I could make it across the whole lawn. Suddenly, right as we reached the grass of the yard, I heard the woman let out a loud gasp. Not an exhausted gasp, but more of a sudden surprise, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground and a person getting the wind knocked out of them. I looked back just long enough to see the woman lying flat on the ground. She must have slipped on the slick grass or tripped over something and fell face first into the frozen grass. Thankfully, this gave me an advantage, and I continued running until I made it up to the house. As I slammed the sliding door shut, I woke my cousin Matt up and quickly blurted out what had happened to me. He took his revolver out of the closet and searched around outside of the house and yard, but the lady had disappeared by then, and he wasn't going to go into the woods looking for her. The next day, my cousin and a buddy of his went through the woods to the clearing to recover my airsoft gun I had dropped, which thankfully was still there. They didn't see anything out of the normal, but I was still scolded slightly the next day about my decision to go out to the clearing alone the night prior. I still don't understand what that woman was doing out there that night. The only thing I know is that she was crazy and clearly had bad intentions for me. I'll always consider myself lucky because if it weren't for that woman falling over, I might not have made it back to the house before she had grabbed me, and I would be at her mercy. I grew up in a very rural area with dense forests and no other houses than ours around. So my family and I loved to go outside for long walks with the dog. By the time this incident happened, I was a 12-year-old girl. On this day, my family and I were on a walk through the woods again. I needed to collect wildflowers for my biology class, and I had seen some new ones before which I wanted to collect on the way back home, but my parents wanted to go another track. We separated and would meet up back home, and I made my way alone. I found the flowers on the track, and I knelt to pick them up when I suddenly heard the crunching of a car driving on the rough track. That was strange because there were no cars allowed in the woods, but I didn't think about it and simply stepped aside to let the car pass. It was a green Land Rover, and I saw the silhouette of a man behind the windshield. As the car approached me, it started to slow down, and I became a little nervous, so I stepped away from it a little bit farther. The man then stopped his car right beside me, only a few feet away. The driver pulled his window down, and I stared, unable to move. I saw the grinning face of a bearded middle-aged man who shouted, "Excuse me, could you help me find the way out of the forest?" I felt extremely relieved, because he obviously just wanted to ask for directions, which explained how he was so lost deep in the forest. But when I started explaining, he asked me to come closer because he couldn't hear me properly. At this point, I was really alarmed. We had some kids go missing in my area before, and my parents had always been very honest with telling me about the true intentions of bad people. Still, instead of leaving immediately in this situation, I simply stayed right where I was standing and spoke up so that he could hear me better. Ignoring what I was saying, he opened his door and started walking up to me. Frozen in fear, I simply stood there. But when he reached out for my arm, to drag me into his car, I guess, I woke up. Adrenaline rushed through my veins, and I ran for my life into the woods. "Hey, wait for me, sweetie," I heard him scream, followed by the sound of cracking sticks right behind me. I panicked and ran as fast as I could. My only advantage was that I knew these woods very well, and I could only hope for him to not know which way I was taking. My knowledge was probably the only thing that saved me, and I arrived on an open road that led to my house. I couldn't see the man anymore, but I was still paranoid, so I ran all the way back and told my parents everything when I finally arrived at my house. Every time from then on when I went for a walk, I took our big black dog with me just as a precaution. On one of these walks, I followed a road and some cars drove past me, with one of them being a green Land Rover. I immediately panicked when it slowed down. I guess my dog does a good job of scaring people off by his height, so the Land Rover just drove off again.